What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. It was a dark night, clearly more so than most nights. The Shadowlands were darkening to the north, and there was nothing they could do even with the power to bind the shadows that rise with each passing day. Already 3 cities and hidden villages were consumed in the darkness, and their inhabitants turned into the sickening creations from the far east. Past the Shadowlands was their home. Their forgotten home, centuries far beyond counting ago. The lands to the east of the Shadowlands were beautiful, bountiful, and kissed the coast of what the Westerosi call the Sunset Sea. That land that was called myth and legend was only showing its factuality with how wild the Shadowlands were becoming. Winds were rising along with dust and ash. No longer were the other cities and hidden villages going to survive if even the mountains can't stop the spreading shadows too long. The Kaguya of Ashai's hidden village sat idly by. The culture of Ashai as a whole was at stake, along with that of Et. Their race, old and forgotten and considered foreign, was on the verge of complete eradication. They needed to find a way to stop the rising fear and rising evil from the east. Kanagakur, Sunagakur, Iwagakur, Karagakur and Kumogakur were all gone, but for some reason they recognized their symbols on the weapons and shimmering attire. 8 of the Shadow Warriors they'd managed to bind to their will. To think the ancient dead were beginning to rise with the darkness. There was more disturbing news. Their foreign dignitary, Melisandre, had managed to convert Stannis Baratheon, the true king of Westeros. She was a whore and a witch, but damned good at both. She had given them strange messages speaking of Azor Ahai, and that this Stannis Baratheon is the second coming. Rubbish. The Ashai I knew better. If anyone was to be the Azor Ahai reincarnated, it had to be someone younger, stronger, more refined to fight the White Walkers of the land of always winter. Of course the White Walkers had to come from the colder parts of Kaminari no Kuni. The Ashai had records of Kaminari, but nothing of what was beyond the frozen peaks to the north of Kumogakur. It was infuriating to the lords and Kaguyas of Ashai and surround lands. So many had been lost in their attempt to quell the rising dead. Not only that, but the Westerosi, their main source of payment, had exploded in an all-out war. Too many of their shinobi were hired to fight and assassinate so far west that it was a wonder if they made it to Westeros or not. But of course, even with the darkness of the Shadowlands rising, the problems with Et were also increasing. Trade blunders, bad borders, and the worst, slave raids. Constant attacks from Et's god emperor was beginning to serious damage the hope Ashai has for standing up to the dark undead scourge on its way. Entire weeks are spent sacrificing, praying, and even having sacred orgies in the name of R'hllor, the one true god of everything. The people of Ashai were desperate and had little to nowhere to return. There was hope, though word spread of a boy who'd received premonitions of R'hllor himself. They didn't have enough information as to who this boy was, but it was certain that he was the one to save Ashai and Et. That could only mean that this boy was Naruto Uzumaki's heir. A young shinobi by the name of Kai stood with a blank expression on his face. The tavern he'd just entered was chock full of foreigners. They ranged from the dark-skinned men and women from the Summer Isles to the pale white men from Westeros. They were laughing and talking with one another, drinking themselves to the point some began to fall unconscious. Tavern wenches were slapped on their asses as they passed, and some were outright grabbed and practically raped on the spot. Kai took a deep breath, wafting through the smoke and flying spit. It was practically a nightmare here in this tavern, but nevertheless he was here for a reason. There was someone important he had to meet. It took him a while, thanks to the ridiculous amount of men and women that were packed into this tavern. Lady Tsunari. Kai bowed his head as he took a seat. You wanted me? Kai Tsunari smiled, flipping a hand through her red hair. You know, you never have to call me that in private. Sorry. He frowned. It's a habit now. Cousin Tsunari sighed. The happy feeling had disappeared. It's getting too dangerous here in Ashai. Red priestesses and priests are sacrificing heretics and non-believers left and right to try and get R'hllor to stop the rising darkness, but our Lord has his sights set elsewhere to fight the great other. Not this, I know. Kai frowned. What do you propose we do, though? I'm shinobi, your nobility. We can't just go and leave our people to suffer in the shroud of the darkness. It's getting more dangerous now to cross through land or even through the Jade Sea. The Saffron Strait has become more turbulent too, meaning practically every exit is considered impossible. I have a way. Kai Tsunari smiled. I've heard rumors of a Targaryen having 3 dragon's eggs, we can easily go and find her and help her birth them. Birth dragons. Kai nearly blurted with wide onyx eyes. Are you mad? Of course not, she chided with a pout. I'm only saying that we should use her dragons to save our people. The Westerosi have the Lord of Light on their side watching over them, but this darkness is our own fault. But how in God's name will we take her dragons? Kai asked with narrowed eyes, completely skeptical of the whole operation. We don't even know where she is. It'll take planning, plotting, money, which neither of us have. A ship maybe more. Oh stop it, Kai. Tsunari frowned and released a pained sigh. You've always been a cunt that doesn't know how to have adventures. Don't you want the dragons to come alive again? Don't you want magic to return? Oh, I see what this is about. Kai crossed his arms over his chest, glaring at his cousin. All the same, you're trying to be revered as much as our ancestor Naruto Uzumaki was, aren't you? You're trying to gain fame for being the one to bring us chakra back. Well, I'll tell you this now. Leave me out of it. What? Tsunari nearly stabbed her cousin with a wooden fork. The time for chakra has come and gone thousands of years ago. Cousin Kai frowned. Even if the dragons were birthed, what then? We'll have our powers. And then what? Kai asked once more. We can't even read our ancestors' language, and we're nowhere close to translating it than we were when we first stumbled upon them 1,000 years ago. We have potential to use chakra, yes, but who in God's name will teach us? Who in any of Ashai's hidden villages are there chakra users? That's right, none. So you're telling me we do nothing despite the danger the darkness is posing? Tsunari asked through gritted teeth. I'm saying we do something logical. Kai frowned. Chakra isn't for us, not yet at least. Kaith sat, her eyes scanning the brazier in front of her. Heat radiated through her body, filling her with the Lord of Light's strength and wisdom. The flames flickered against her skin, the sweat glistening against her tan yet pale skin. She covered her face with a great mask that left only her eyes to be seen with complete visibility. She bore the standard hexagonal design that everyone in Ashai, shinobi to priest and priestess alike, wore. She took slow deep breaths, drawing in the sweet smell of burning dead wood and bark from trees of the Shadowlands. The scent soothed and loosened her from her stress. Suddenly a great powerful pull came through her body, almost as if the fire was controlling her. She pressed her hands against the red-hot metal brazier and stared into the flames, her hands clearly burning at the oppressive heat, but not once did she scream. Her lips were shut, with her eyes planted upon the flickering flames. Each passing second, the flames seemed to be speaking to her, showing her something. For a second she heard a voice, the voice of her lord. He spoke to her, called to her, commanded her. Daenerys Targaryen, the Stormborn, was to become the mother of dragons, and she was to head to Karth to meet her. Kaith was about to question her lord, but deigned from doing so and quickly bowed to the exploding flames. The woman turned to face the followers behind her, their heads bowed deeply to the flickering brazier behind her. The Lord of Light has spoken, and he commanded a pilgrimage to the west. Dragons were the greatest to behold the power of their lord, for fire and light are one. Kaith smiled beneath her mask. Dragons, she felt her heart jump in her chest at the thought of gaining the powers of Magicka, the ability to do more with her shadow binding abilities. There was always more to their powers, but with the death of magic and the death of dragons, their abilities were nothing but no more. She thought in a curious thought. She was about to wonder how her good friend Melisandre was doing in Westeros. Especially with this information, men and women parted ways for the Red Priestess as she headed towards the entrance of the Fire Temple. Ashai was large, with almost 2 million Ashai present within the city itself, easily larger than King's Landing, but more cramped thanks to the mountains that engulf almost the entire country. They were forced to adapt to the terrain and built cities along the coast with their backs to the mountains. Ashai wasn't the only city there, but clearly the largest and most known. To the east was Asherai, home to Asherai. They were fundamentally the same, but they were of different city-states. To the west was Ashani, smaller than her sister city-states, but boasted a powerful shinobi power base. Kaith was sadly going to have to go through those two city-states to gather the supplies she needs. Ship travel wasn't safe anymore thanks to the rising darkness in the Shadowlands. Of all of the travel lanes, the Jade Sea and the Saffron Strait had to be the ones to fall under the influence. Kaith bit her lip, knowing that this was definitely a test of her faith in her lord. The great Valyrian steel doors swung open, revealing the beauty and awe-inspiring beauty of Ashai. The dark streets were left in the blood-red hue of the lanterns hanging throughout the city and beyond. Not only a great volcano rested not too far away from the mountains that protected Ashai. People walked back and forth, close bearing hexagonal designs above the streets. Trailing her eyes to the rooftop, shinobi could be seen training in the art of evading and stealth. The steps from the temple were great Almost 200 in total acolytes of the Lord of Light trailed past her following another fire priestess or fire priest. She was wondering when another sacred orgy was going to take place. She herself felt a small tingle and felt that the Lord of Light needed to be appeased in a different way. People bowed her way but kept their distance. She kept to herself as she tapped her sandaled feet onto the cobblestone pavement heading to the east gate. She needed to hire a carriage to take her to Asherai, for the ghost grass would undoubtedly taunt her horse to eat at the perils of living so close to the Shadowlands. The volcano rumbled softly, covering the entire city-state in its ashen shroud. Kaith didn't worry though. If any of them were to be hit with any of the falling flames, it would be the best way to die, to be engulfed in the fires of their Lord was what many of them hoped to happen to their bodies. To be burned was the greatest gift from the Lord of Light. An even greater gift. Kaith heard stories of a few shinobi in Kunoichi already learning to breathe fire like their ancestors from beyond the Shadowlands. The ability to control the element of fire was something that the Ashai and the Asherai held in high regard, seeing as barely anyone could do it. But in the past, Kaith couldn't help but think of all the wondrous battles that ensued in the name of their Lord. Rualer. She frowned at the thought for a moment. Though there were legends of other shinobi in Kunoichi of the ancient days that could control other elements such as wind and earth and even lightning, but the worst of them all was water. She frowned deeper, thinking of how many men and women had their fires doused by the use of water from the great other. She shivered at the heinous thought water techniques against fire could destroy everything her Lord Rualer created. The Shadowbinder stopped herself when she realized that she was shaking in her kimono. Her eyes trailed left and right, watching the shadows and silhouettes of men and women trudging through the streets of Ashai. The pagodas were beginning to drop lanterns, illuminating the alleyways to reveal the terrors that the night was known to contain. The night is dark and full of terrors, she repeated in her mind with a blank look. She turned on her heel and headed along down the dark alleyway, keeping her eyes averted from the various slaves and prostitutes lining the walls and the doorways. Men were sickening, but the women were worse here in Ashai. If one wasn't a kunoichi or a priestess, then that woman was going to be no less than a whore with little to no self-respect. Kaith froze when her thoughts brought her to the image of her old friend Melisandre. That woman was once a slave. Thankfully, the Lord of Light had other plans for her and turned her into one of the most well-renowned red priestesses, but these women weren't as lucky. Kaith frowned. She knew that there was nothing that could be done for these people unless the Lord of Light commanded it. She pushed along, finding the cobblestone to disappear with each passing step deeper into the alleyway. Her sandaled feet sloshed and splashed into the muddy shit-covered road. It was no matter. She'd walked this way countless times during her life, finding that with each passing day the road only got worse and worse. 3 men walked past her, bald of head but tattooed with fire designs and ancient designs that could only be described as their ancestors' culture. These men wore ornate robes and armor with spears and swords with blades in the design of a writhing flame. These men were none other than the Fiery Hand. There were 1,000 of them here in Ashai to protect the Temple of Rualer and another 1,000 in Volantis to do the same. These men were patrolling the area for non-believers or those who wished to taint the name of their Lord. In her carelessness, she continued walking and didn't take notice of a bucket of shit and slop flowing from a window above her. Lady Kaith, one of the Fiery Hands, shot out. The large man rushed forward and protected the fire priestess from the falling filth. He took the brunt while the rest of the men burst into the building and immediately dragged the family out of the hovel and into the street, their swords and daggers drawn at their necks. The family pleaded and cried out, begging for mercy, but the Fiery Hands weren't known for such an act. I didn't see her, please, I didn't see her. Kaith drowned out their cries and simply wiped her kimono free of any of the stray pieces of filth. She gave the Fiery Hands a look and walked away. Not once she looked back, not even when their shrill squeals sent shivers up and down her spine. Kai and Tsunari parted ways from the tavern with their silhouettes disappearing into the large crowd of people. The pagodas stood with an omnipresent glare, their red hue dimly lighting the city. It was slightly nerve-wracking to the young shinobi. The colors reminded him of the demons. The scrolls from their ancestors bore pictures of the colors were the same, black and red, almost like pouring blood. For some reason, Ashai was always filled with a heinous dread, almost as if every step was made with pain. Kai scoffed. Pain wasn't known until one became a shinobi. The city was losing its hue, its beauty, at the base of an Active volcano. The city could go up in flames at any moment, any time, and worst yet the darkness from the Shadowlands. A shiver ran up his spine. Images of the dead rising came to mind. They were covered in dust with their eyes blacked out save for the white pupils they had. Their skin looked cracked with black smoke flowing from the open gashes in their corrupted skin. Kai froze in his steps. He couldn't stop his hands from shaking. Kai's breath shook with each vibration sent through and from his body. Staying in Ass-High wasn't going to be safe for his sanity. He needed to leave. If there's a mission to go to ET or even as far as Westeros, he was intending to take it as soon as he catches wind of it. Maybe he might even take Tsunari with him. He and his cousin were always close, and having another adventure with his cousin couldn't hurt, especially in light of all of this destruction. Maybe she was right. Helping birth the dragons that Daenerys Targaryen has would be a good idea. Maybe once the dragons are free. Kai was hoping to use them to beat back the darkness of the Shadowlands. Hoping. Kai's side was that all they really had. Hoped the volcano doesn't explode and engulf them all. Hope no one drops an army on Ash-High's shores. Hope the darkness doesn't spread over the mountains and take them all. Kai punched a wall. Fed up with this waiting attitude, he felt like some caged animal with little to nothing to do about his destiny. ET was stealing their women and their children and murdering their men. Westerosi were too cowardice to come this far east, and the darkness, the goddamn darkness. A darkness Roaller had no care of. Kai knew it, Tsunari knew it, hell, even the priests and priestesses knew it. Their lord was too concentrated on dealing with the Great Other to care about a problem. They created the problem, though the Great Other was on the opposite side of the known world in Westeros. This darkness was a product of their own arcane experiments and the mistake of a certain ancestor of theirs when they delved too deeply into the secrets of life and immortality. His name was taboo here in Ass-High and the other city-states, but Kai knew him as Orochimaru. No one knew what that name meant or where he truly originated. Some say in the Far East, farther than any man has ever traveled. Others say he was a demon spawn born of the shadows and demons. All of this was born of their own greed, and Roaller was leaving them to deal with the problem on their own. Kai wasn't about to let the darkness take him without a fight, though the only known thing to defeat the shadow spawn was through the use of flames. They flung rocks of fire at them, torches, even covered an entire field with burning oil, but even that ran out against the immense army. It was nearly impossible to defeat this darkness without dragons, without magicka, without chakra. Kai smirked, finally finding himself agreeing with his ambitious cousin Tsunari. Kai looked up to the smoke-covered sky, examining the stars, or at least the stars he'd managed to catch sight of. We need to get our shit together, Kai thought to himself. Taking a slow breath, he inhaled the soft smell of smoked fish and garlic rice along with the scent of sizzling beef. Our priorities should lie with protecting our way of life, and not sacrificing to our God who doesn't care for our problems. Clasping his hands together, the boy headed along, sandals clacking against the cobblestone road. His black hair flowed down, framing his face as he trailed along. The rest of his shirt came to view, and the people immediately parted. He paid no attention to their actions and continued along. As he passed, though, the people's eyes were planted on the image of a red and white fan emblazoned on his back. Rain pelted King's Landing for the first time in so long. People flocked for cover, while those not so lucky were left in the torrential downpour. Families that weren't torn apart by the war cowered beneath fur blankets and tarps, while others simply withstood the rain. It was surprising to say the least. Rain barely ever fell on King's Landing, at least for as long as Naruto could remember. His blue eyes stared off from his covered balcony. The waters of Blackwater Bay were rushing, turning into rapids against the rocky coast. Waves thrashed before his eyes, and the winds roared with a high-pitched howl. Joffrey came to him just 2 hours before, saying that his force was delayed due to the sudden rain. Naruto sighed in relief at the news. Once Joffrey was out of earshot, the prince wasn't looking forward to war. At least the gods were making sure to ease the passing. He sighed and rested his fists against the stone railing, keeping his eyes planted on the water in the city below. For some strange reason he felt something in his stomach, almost like a dull soft flame flickering. He took soft breaths, trying to calm down the writhing flames, but nothing so far would calm it down. He tried asking Sasuke, but of all the times that the Uchiha could disappear, it had to be now. The boy had no idea how to call the man back, so he resigned to staring off into space. He was alone, to say the least, with Ser Delran and Lady Tarina out hand-picking his army. That meant that they were stuck with them. That meant that Naruto was left here in King's Landing with his only friend that he knew of being his squire Bran. But even Bran had changed in light of everything that has happened. For a moment Naruto once saw his own death in Bran's darker-looking eyes. Naruto couldn't blame the Stark, though. After all, he watched his father die before his very eyes, but if Bran knew about his father's death, Naruto couldn't stop thinking of why Bran didn't save his father. Naruto groaned and let out another exasperated sigh. The rains pounded harder against the roof and the walls. Soon enough the winds picked up, bringing the rain to meet Naruto face to face, drenching his tunic blonde hair and breeches. He frowned and turned on his feet, heading back to his bed, ready to collapse for the rest of the day. The rain had already put a damper on his mood. He removed his tunic, revealing his bare chest and all the scars and bruises from his previous fights and battles, but to his surprise the burn mark was nowhere to be seen. There was almost no indication of burning, or even a spear being dug into his side. The longer he stared at his body, the angrier he got, though he clenched his fist and rammed his knuckles through the mirror. So a spear digging into my side heals perfectly, Naruto said through clenched teeth, but these gashes across my face won't. His hand traced against his cheeks with a soft caress. The once sapphire blue eyes shimmered with a dull gray hue. The reflection wasn't of him, it was of something else, someone broken. He knew, they knew, everyone knew how broken he was. He'd snapped, lost it all, and for once in his life Naruto had never felt so lost before. He clenched his teeth, his breath hitching with a newfound anger resonating within. Energy that he'd once forgotten surged within him. No one was near, no one was coming to see him. Bran was off with his sisters as Naruto had ordered, and his own mother was caught up with being forced to counsel Joffrey. Sasuke had disappeared. Myro was nowhere to be found. He roared like a stuck animal. He cried out, spoke quickly, the words sticking to his throat. The power burned within him, spreading throughout his body, filling his veins with a new strength. His breaths were heavy and rough, but soon enough they calmed. Naruto cocked his fist back with a newfound fire within. He stared at the broken image in front of him, a scared boy, terrified and lost no longer. Naruto thought to himself he'd been tortured for almost a month, forced to murder a close friend, and sat around doing nothing for the last few weeks. He'd done nothing to show his strength, done nothing to show his worth. He could hear their words, monster, creature, freak. But they weren't coming from King's Landing, they weren't coming from the people he knew. Memories that weren't his were flowing into his mind with little to no reasoning. He could remember their faces though, their looks of disgust, their looks of abhorrence. No longer was he going to put up with it. His own reflection showed him how pathetic he'd looked. For almost 2 months he'd let himself down, he'd let his friends down, he'd let his family down. The glass shards slid from the cuts in his knuckles. He'd let them all down with how weak he'd made himself seem. No, he told himself, no longer. Joffrey may be king and he may not have any claim to the throne any longer, but he wasn't about to let Joffrey get full control over him. Naruto's dull blue eyes stayed locked on his ruined face. He fought the tears back, the pain rising in his chest. He clenched his fist as tightly as he could, drawing blood from his palm. His reflection pissed him off, filled him with a disgust that he'd never felt for anyone before him. The man was a shell of what he could be. The potential had been realized years ago, and yet he'd let himself down. The thunder roared with him as he emptied his lungs in one final rush. What was the point? There didn't have to be a point. Naruto didn't need a point, he didn't need a reason. All he could say was that what he saw before him was an image he hated. He hated it, he hated seeing it. That wasn't him, that'll never be him. His heart raced as he made his declaration over the booming thunder. The gods were on his side, the gods were bearing witness. The people might not appreciate what he'll do for them, but he didn't care. The people won't appreciate what he'll become, but he won't care no matter the outcome. Naruto made a promise to himself and to those around him that he wasn't going to fall into darkness again. It is when we hit our lowest moments that we are the most subject to change. Naruto whispered beneath his breath, I've hit my lowest. Change me for the better, change me, father, warrior, smith, mother, maiden, crone, even the stranger. Change me so I can never let those who wish me and my family harm succeed. Change me to beat even myself, change me to never fall again. Make me stronger than the challenges I'll soon to face, make me stronger than those who wish me harm. Gift me the strength to prove to myself that I am not who they make me out to be. Give me the power to follow my destiny. Thunder roared, and the seas churned. He bellowed out, shooting his fist at his cracked mirror, chakra burning off of his fist. The glass cracked slowly, at first cutting through his broken visage and cutting along to the edges of the glass. He growled and roared once more, pressing more chakra into his fist, tearing apart the shards piece by piece, until once he heard the gut-wrenching crack, he pulled back as the mirror collapsed completely. No longer able to bear his image, his chest felt lighter, and his arms no longer carried a weight that felt like a ton of iron. His legs were on fire but waved with a cool wind in between. No longer did his breath shake, no longer did it hurt to breath, no longer did his scars seem like unholy gashes. He stood tall, shoulders held back and fists already healing. Fire raged within his stomach, spreading throughout his mind, ran smooth, flooding with a euphoric feeling that simply kept spreading. Slow, deep breaths filled his lungs, as a smile, the first smile he'd had in almost 2 months, spread across his face. Tears trickled down, sliding across his face. Tears filled with all the emotions he'd bottled flowed down his cheeks in a cascade. Naruto, Sasuke suddenly said, "You're going to need to catch up to the other players if you want the power to protect." Humph. Naruto grunted, the smile never leaving his face. "And how do I do that? I have a good idea of where to start." Daenerys Targaryen held the love of her life in her hands. His eyes were rolled to the back of his head with a darker hue. Her hands slid up and down his dark copper-toned skin. He was dead in the mind while seemingly fine on the surface. She'd been tricked, lied to, and disgraced. Love was her weakness. Her belief in the small hope of salvation disappeared the moment she'd agreed to that which. The tears built in her violet eyes as she clasped his cheeks, even though she knew he wouldn't feel her. Her chest was numb and her heart hadn't beat this slowly in ages. Her silvery blonde hair was loose of its braids, barely able to keep her Khaleesi appearance. Already more than half the Khalasar had packed and left them behind on the border to the red waste. A small tear trickled down her face as she watched the pained expression spread across Khal Drogo's face. He shivered beneath her small lithe body as she traced her palm across his bare chest. She wanted to hear him groan, she wanted to hear him make a sound, anything to let her know that he was alive in there. He breathed slowly, almost to the point she couldn't even tell if he was. It was soft, tiny breaths, and it filled Daenerys with so much pain to see him like this. She wrapped her hands around the pillows of their bedroll. Her arms shook and her body trembled on top of her husband. The Khal had never seemed so weak before. She'd never seen him so defeated. There was nothing they could do since the witch Miri Mazdur had taken her son's life and given her a shell of her husband. Daenerys shut her eyes, fighting back the salty tears burning at the edges. Her husband was tricked of life. Her son was swindled of taking his first breaths. She was a fool to believe in the lies of a witch like Miri Mazdur. She was a fool to forsake everything, including the life of her unborn son, to save her wounded husband. Her son and stars was no more. She, the moon of his life, was no more as well. She clenched the edges of the pillow, raising it over onto Khal Drogo's face. He was in misery. She could sense it. Despite his rather peaceful disposition, she needed to end it for him. Some things are meant to happen, be it death or even the birth of life. Events that are part of one's destiny can't be changed, no matter how painful they seem to be. Daenerys thought to herself, "I am the dragon." She pressed the pillow against his face, holding it down as hard as she can. She whimpered with each sudden lurch and twitch. He tried to fight back, but she didn't let up. She bit her lower lip, begging for the moments to pass on faster, to end the torture she was doing to him and to herself. Her heart raced when she felt his chest shoot and only to burst forward. He shuddered beneath the suffocating trap she had him in. Not once did he push her off, not once did he even raise a hand to her. He took it, and that only served to break Daenerys more. She wept, shaking with each second. Before long he fell limp, officially gone from the world and riding in the night lands with their son. She rested her head into her hands as she finally broke. She wept and shuddered with each passing second. He was dead. Her son was dead. Her brother was dead. Everyone she'd held dear to her heart was dead, and now the final one was by her own hand. She pushed the pillow away to reveal his face, wrought with a pained but still blank emotion. His eyes were bloodshot and rolled to the back of his head. No breath, no sigh, no life. Her lips quivered the longer she stared at him. Her shoulders shuddered as she rested her soft, pale palms against his chest. She traced the scars and the cuts to his body as her violet eyes locked with his purple face. Only when the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, when the seas go dry and the mountains blow in the wind like leaves, Daenerys whispered into his ears, "Only then shall you return to me, my son and stars." "Ser Jorah," she cried, a small croak escaping with her words. "Khaleesi, what is it?" Ser Jorah rushed into the room, sword drawn. "Get my blood riders. We're going to set up a funeral pyre for Khal Drogo," Daenerys said without a single crack or break in tone, "and bring me Miri Mazdur." She stood before her people in the dark of night. Khal Drogo lay upon a great wooden pyre surrounded by tall grass. She was calm and reserved with the remaining members of her Khalasar waiting. Her words, warm winds blew through her garments and through her silver blonde hair, filling her with a soft feeling of sadness and happiness. All the same, calm and reserved, her eyes scanned the remaining followers. She had no words were spoken amongst them, and not a sound was made save for the neighing of The horse's nearby flaps of tents shook in the warm winds that began to pick up. She shut her eyes when the soft scent of smoked horse meat filled her nose. The smell of the red waste filled her nostrils. Entering her system, she felt elated and lightened. Despite all that has happened recently, despite everything that had happened to her, she decided to stand taller, stronger, and more powerful than anyone could ever hope. She was going to show all those who doubted her, belittled her, didn't believe in her. She was going to show them all what happens when you turn away a true dragon, a true Targaryen. She was no longer going to be a pawn in someone else's game. The tables have turned, and now she was a player, a contender for the final prize. From the beginning she had nothing, no family but her crazed brother, no home thanks to the stupid deals and words her brother would say to the different lords of the free cities, no money thanks to the begging nature of her elder brother. And now once she finally had those things, finally had the hope of returning to the place of her people, Westeros, it was all stripped from her piece by piece. For once she asked the gods, or any deity willing to listen, for once the tables should have turned in her direction, for once she begged, and for once she received an answer. She smiled softly, recalling what they'd told her through Mary Mazdur, only death can pay for life. I am Daenerys Stormborn, of the House Targaryen. Dany cried out in Dothraki, I am the blood of old Valyria, I am the dragon's daughter, and I swear to you that those who wish to harm you will die. Screaming, Ser Jorah Mormont and Rakaro appeared from one of the tents with a bound and tied Mary Mazdur. Small trickles of blood and flecks of skin seemed to be flowing from her face, and the many bruises adorning her cheeks and swollen eyes she carried with her an air of defiance. To Daenerys it was no matter. To the Targaryen, Mary Mazdur was going to feel her wrath in one way or another. Once the woman was secured to one of the posts of the pyre, she immediately smiled and looked to the Targaryen with a rebellious look in her dark-colored eyes. You will not hear my screams, I will. Daenerys interrupted with a raised hand, violet eyes darkening with an evil Targaryen glint. And it is not your screams I want, it's your life. Ser Jorah began. No time was lost, and the exiled Northmen tossed a torch into the tall grass leading up to the pyre. Slowly but surely the flames spread across, shooting in all directions, following the path of tall grass and into the structure itself. Mary Mazdur began to sing in Ashai, filling their ears with her ululating and shrill cries. No one understood her words, but those songs and verses were replaced with her tears and screams as the flames finally spread and engulfed her body completely. Daenerys watched with a small smile praying across her face. Mary Mazdur fought back against her binds, but the chains that held her did their job and kept her planted where she was. Go to them. A small deep foreboding voice sounded in her mind. It echoed with a heavy baritone. Before long her feet began to move on their own, heading into the funeral pyre. The dragons will need their mother. Before long she found herself waiting in the fire, waiting for the intense heat to burn her skin from her bones, but none of it came. Her body wasn't in pain, or anywhere close to it. She shut her eyes once the fires caught onto her body, burning away her clothes. It was light, unbelievable light. Her legs collapsed beneath her, as did the pyre. She knew what she was doing. All she wanted was their trust, the trust in her, and what she was intending to do. No longer was she to be doubted, and this was just going to be a truth to solidify all other truths. She is the dragon. She will be the mother of dragons. I am the dragon. I am the mother of dragons. Daenerys repeated over and over again as the fires continued to rise, bringing her dragon eggs to roll away from Khal Drogo's cremating body and closer to her naked form. I am the dragon. I am the mother of dragons. Naruto looked at his palms, gawking at the blue flame-like energy wisping about. His breath hitched, but a powerful explosion rocked his body from head to toe. The thunder roared once more as midday came to pass. He collapsed, gripping the rug beneath him as the power surged through him. It grew with each passing second, roaring through his system like the thunder outside. Nothing was stopping his power this time, nothing. He wrapped his fingers tightly around the edge of the rug, trying his best to hold back the amazing flooding feeling within his stomach and his veins. Keep it at Naruto. Sasuke smirked. Chakra, it's returned. A large beaming smile spread across Naruto's face. His breaths turned deep once again as the chakra rushed through his bloodstream, filling every nook and cranny, every empty part of his body. He shot back, muscles tensed and hands open wide. It wasn't pain he felt, but instead strength beyond reason, strength beyond comprehension. She shot back, laughing with the rushing waves of Blackwater Bay. He bellowed out with shimmering eyes as lightning flashed. Before long he stood covered in a small blue hue of flames flowing from his stomach and bare navel. Naruto. Sasuke smiled strangely. This is amazing. Do you know what this means? No. Naruto raised an eyebrow. It means Sasuke shut his eyes. For a moment Sharingan time skipped. The covers slid from his body. warmth and a strange contradicting cool swept over his bare chest. A heat built within his stomach and began to spread throughout his body, going to his toes and out to his fingers. He groaned and clenched his teeth, trying to understand what this feeling was. He clasped his fingers around the linens of his bed, his legs clasping around a fur pillow. He bit down, trying his best to keep away the pain. Nothing was working. Suddenly, all around the barracks, men and women began to fall from their bunks and collapse onto the wooden floor. Their bodies writhed and screams shot from their mouths. They were all in fear, terrified of what was happening to their bodies. Others were far more calm, but everyone else, they weren't as lucky. Some bit down as hard as they could onto the thick furs they used as blankets. They fought against the pain and the building energy within their bodies. There were some that seemed to be able to fight back well enough, while others were holding their abdomens, as if their guts were about to explode in all directions. From the other side of the bunk room, a Jonin plowed into the room, one hand holding the door open, the other resting tightly against his stomach. Kai rubbed his eyes in pain, trying his best to cope with the burning sensation taking over his muscles and his body. This energy had a mind of its own. His legs clenched, cramping his thigh muscles, bringing him over onto his torso. His arms bent back, clenching. Everyone was feeling this too, but suddenly the heat and the pain disappeared from his body, replaced with a wondrous euphoria. His vision had also somehow taken to the dark of the room with near perfection. He could see every single person with high detail down to the pores on their faces. Something was wrong. Something was completely wrong. He shot up, seeing flames build around the silhouettes of the various shinobi and kunoichi. He pushed past the Jonin at the door and fled towards the bathhouse of the barracks. Everywhere men and women's cries could be heard, echoing throughout the wooden halls. Some went into soul-ripping shrieks. There were these triplets that Kai knew since childhood. All three had lavender eyes, but now the three burst through the wooden wall of their bunk room, holding their faces, roaring out in pain. This was more than a horror story. He charged ahead to see a woman fall to the floor, her flames sputtering out. Kai backed away, backing into another shinobi, whom of which swung his arms wildly in all directions, his left forearm covering his eyes. Kai didn't need much to build on, but he could easily see the large cascading trails of blood falling down the shinobi's face. Kai needed to get out soon. This wasn't supposed to be happening. He dashed forward, energy building in his legs, speeding him ahead. He froze in his steps once the open windows came along his path. Despite the smoke coming from the volcano nearby, Kai's eyes were locked with the massive blood-red moon staring at him. His heart raced as images began to rush through his mind, images of things he'd never seen in his life. The shinobi reined his emotions, and thanks to his ninja training, he took off once more. He heard a soft cry. Kai Saya. Kai roared back, trying his best to stop his eyes from drying out. Are you alright? No. She looked at him, the light of the moon illuminating her face. Veins protruded from her temples and the pupils of her until now pupil-less lavender eyes. Red tears streamed down her face. She shook and trembled beneath the weight of all of this. Her lips quivered as she stared at and through Kai's body, examining his chakra coils that had suddenly been unlocked. Massive amounts of chakra was flowing through his body, with a great amount heading to his eyes. Kai's eyes weren't normal eyes. After all, he wasn't even a normal shinobi. He is an Uchiha and an Uzumaki. She could see him staring at his body, his chakra, his eyes. Never had she been so afraid. Don't do that shit, Naruto shouted over the booming thunder. Bahaha. Sasuke rolled on the floor. You should have seen your fucking face. You're a piece of shit, Naruto growled. I liked you better when you only showed up when I needed you. Well, you're gonna have to deal with me for the rest of your life. Sasuke smirked. Good luck with that, buddy. Why do you speak like that? Naruto asked, wiping the sweat from his brow. You speak so strangely. Speak normally. Damn you, normal you say. Sasuke glared. Urusai Uzuratamki Nanda yo Omi wa Uzuratamki. Naruto's eyes flared up. Sasuke felt a small smirk spread across his face. Kyudabear team. Sasuke's smile never left his face. Naruto's jaw dropped, and for a moment Sasuke thought that the Uzumaki reborn was going to jump around screaming about becoming Hokage again, but again Sasuke had to remind himself, this kid isn't the Naruto he knew. This is someone else entirely. Naruto placed his hand on his mouth, staring at Sasuke with wide eyes and a fearful lump stuck in his throat. He was confused. He understood every word that Sasuke said, and he even replied in the same language. Naruto's body began to shiver in his clothes, clearly horrified with what had just transpired. It's time for you to begin your next stage of training. Sasuke smiled. Shut your eyes and lay back without delay. Naruto complied, still in a daze of what he'd just managed to accomplish. He shut his eyes, feeling his exhausted muscles loosen and his aching bones ease. He took slow, deep breaths, allowing his beating brain to come to a slow calming thump. Naruto suddenly heard Sasuke's voice echoing around him. They must be back in that strange metallic dream world. He shot up, feeling the water flow from his hair and clothes, leaving his completely dry. Sasuke stood in the shadows, a hand covered in flame and the other covered in lightning. Naruto was about to charge at him, but Sasuke beat Naruto to the punch, firing off the two elements, lighting the entire cavernous tunnel. Naruto's eyes widened with surprise at just how large this place really was. The ceiling was easily 100 feet high, maybe even more, and the walls were at least just as far away from each other. But that wasn't all. There was another figure standing next to Sasuke. He was tall and had a head of gravity-defying silver hair. He had one eye visible and the rest of his face completely covered in a mask. The man walked forward, feet splashing against the still surface of the water, and here Naruto thought he'd seen it all. If this were any other situation, he would have passed out, but for some reason the boy wanted to stay and see where this would go. But instead of watching the man's movements, Naruto was more interested in how he was walking on water while he himself sunk to the floor beneath. The water rippled in a strange pattern, spreading out in all directions from each step that Kakashi took. Naruto's arms wrapped tightly around his neck. The prince was about to roar out in surprise, but decided to let the man continue whatever it was that he was doing. Naruto assumed that they were close in this past life of his. Kakashi wept softly, tightening his grip on the blonde-haired boy. It was almost like an older brother's grip. "Okay," Naruto said as Kakashi pulled away. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" "I'm here to teach you." Kakashi smiled. "After all, I was once your sensei." Rob sat upon the back of his horse as the reins pelted down onto his forces at his side. Gray wind, almost getting to the height of a small horse, barred his teeth. Around Rob were the various personal battle companions made up of various noble lords and ladies, namely Small John, Umber, Sir Wendell, Mandoli, Daisy, Mormont, Patrick, Mallister, and so on and so forth. They were strong and ready, their hands shaking and twitching against the handles and pommels of their swords and small axes. Daisy, the only female of the group, rested her palm against the mace strapped to her side. Rob's icy blue eyes watched the Lannister camp below. His spies told him it was a camp underneath the command of some Lannister of the Lannisport branch. There were about 3 Lannister knights and countless sworn knights underneath the Lannister banners. Rob wasn't scared, far from it. He'd already won 3 battles with powerful strikes against the Lannisters. Not only that, but the Lords of the Vale were finally starting to pull their weight. He was promised a force of an extra 10,000 Vale men under the command of Lord Yohn Royce the Bronzeon. Hopefully the Vale men will keep their promise. Rob thought he'd need all the help he can get to keep the Lannisters completely on their toes and away from Riverrun, or at the farthest north Seaguard, and to the east. Joffrey's royal army marched up north to Crack Claw Point and towards Salt Pans. Rob was fighting on too many fronts, heading too far towards the Westerlands, leaving his eastern flank free and open. Rob desperately needed the full force of the Vale Lords. He needed the full force of the Tullys and the Riverlands at his back. He needed allies fast. His horse neighed softly, snorting beneath the booming thunder of this stormy night. His men were slightly worried their spies hadn't returned yet. Rob kept his worries hidden beneath the stern expression wrought across his face. Even then no one could see him thanks to the darkness of the night. Gray wind was restless, constantly barring his teeth and digging his paws into the muddy dirt beneath them. He growled with a low, menacing, glowering stare. The Lannisters below were completely unaware of the army waiting at the hills behind them. Rob clenched his teeth as the storm increased in size. Thunder roared, bursting through the night, scaring a few unsuspecting levies behind him. Knights of Winterfell shuddered in their plate armor. Knights of White Harbor steadied their bodies on their saddles. Men below walked about laughing with one another, drinking their mead and ale with little care. Rob could see some Lannister men at arms shimmering in the lightning flashes. Their ornate helmets made them stand out like a sore thumb. Rob could see them right there, ready and ripe for the taking. He clenched his fist around the reins, struggling to keep his urge hidden within. He needed the spies to return, or else this seemingly easy battle will turn into a bloodbath. Lannisters weren't stupid, just cocky and full of themselves. Rob had managed to surmise so far of the 4 battles fought, Rob had personally won 3 of them. Riding into the vanguard where the combat was harshest, he was on a mission. He was going to litter the Southron lands with as many Lannister dead until his sisters and brother were released back to him. Agitation grew within him and Lord Rickard Karstark. The two eyed each other, gripping their sword handles. Rob was sure that if these spies didn't appear anytime soon, he'd lead the charge anyway. Rickard was definitely feeling the same of all the times that he'd send Lord Great John Umber to aid the defense of Pink Maiden and Acorn Hall, but just Before Robb raised his sword to signal the charge, the trees rustled, revealing 8 young Northmen dressed as Lannister soldiers. They panted and sped over to the king in the north, sitting completely unnerved. Your Grace, the man shot forward before bending the knee. There are at least double our forces in the camp. We overheard one of the Lannister commanders talking about another 1,000 men coming from the western coast within the next few hours. What are we to do? The only thing to do, Robb replied with a dark glare. We won't win until they fear us. We will show them that we are not a people to be pushed and belittled. We will show them that we are not a people to be enslaved beneath their Southron ways. We charge now. The king in the north. Robb slapped the reins on the horse, shooting forward, kicking mud up in his wake. The first Lannister camp barricade came into view. Despite the complete inability to see due to the raging storm, Grey Wind could be heard howling with the booming thunder. The two lead the charge, bashing through the barricade. Thankfully, Grey Wind was strong enough to annihilate the barricade. Robb shot through the new opening, swinging his sword down, removing the head of the first Lannister. He set his eyes upon it. The young wolf, the king in the north. Fires were lit all along the border of the camp, illuminating the entire field and the hills surrounding the camp, but that didn't help. From the shadows surrounding the camp, hundreds of mounted Northmen and Stark levies rushed over the fires and trampled over unsuspecting Lannister men. There were others that died immediately, and there were those that survived, but barely. The northern host rushed forward, tearing through the camp, slaughtering every man wearing red of the Lannister banners. Tents were trampled and men were flattened. The Northerners didn't care for the Southron lives, for their lives were for the Northerners to take. Robb was suddenly unhorsed, flying forward thanks to the halberd bill the Lannister billmen wielded. He rolled in the mud and the dirt, covering his body completely. He reached around for his sword, but he sadly managed to lose it in his take of arrow. Westall and Levy rushed at him with an armsman's axe. He swung ready to kill the king in the north, but he'd overestimated his personal skill. Robb shot his arm forward, catching the axe shaft with his forearm and his left hand. Robb tore the axe from the Levy's hands and rammed the axe head into the man's unprotected throat. Blood shot free, spraying across his face, but thankfully the torrential downpour washed the gore from his face. Stark banners came into view, the calm white linen illuminated by the bright, beautifully blinding lightning among the sea of white and gray-red banners bearing golden chains and golden banners bearing 2 crossed long axes. The gray direwolf engulfed the golden lion. Grey Wind suddenly appeared, covered in the blood of Lannister men, carrying Robb's sword in between his teeth. Thank you, boy. Robb smiled. Let's go. Grey Wind shot forward, digging his massive head into the chest plate of a Lannister foot knight. Just as the man collapsed onto the ground, his 3 battle squires charged the wolf with their swords, but Robb jumped in at the perfect moment, slicing the throat from one of them. The Stark growled and lunged forward, digging his blade into the second. The final squire threw down his sword and took off in the opposite direction to join the rest of the retreat. Robb glared at the fleeting form of the squire and drew his dagger. The Stark shut his eyes and hurled the knife forward, the blade spinning like a windmill. Before long, the knife dug at least 2 inches into the man's back. Dead before he touched the ground, Robb ran ahead, tearing the dagger from the man's back to join the rest of the fray. Grey Wind rushed alongside Robb, assembling together with his master. Suddenly a blood-covered Daisy Mormont appeared on the back of her heavily armored northern destrier. Robb didn't see it, but a Lannister longbowman had already drawn and aimed right at his back. Your Grace, she cried, and pulled the reins, turning the horse towards the Lannister. Watch out. No worries, Mormont. A bellowing roar almost as powerful as the thunder above was heard. If it weren't for her own horse's hooves beating on the mud, she could have sworn a giant was rushing into the battlefield. It was none other than the Great Jon's son, Small Jon Umber. Albeit not as large as his father, he carried with him as much strength and pride that practically every Umber had. The fires illuminated the long-haired, terrifying man. He tackled the in comparison tiny man in the ground, probably killing him upon impact. Daisy was concentrating too much on the Umber and failed to take notice of the billman charging at her with a pike. Before the man could reach her, he was suddenly picked up and hurled with a monstrous strength that could only belong to those as large as Small Jon. A small smirk was spread on the man's face. He was Ser Wendell Manderly, large and fat like most Manderlys. In his defense, he hid his muscle beneath all of that blubber. Behind him, covered by the powerful explosion of thunder, a Lannister foot knight rushed the Northman. Ser with a mace. Wendell raised his shield, blocking the mace before it could meet its mark. Wendell launched his fist around, punching in the ornate eye guards of the Lannister helm, but just As the man fell back, an arrow shot forth, embedding through the helm, killing the Lannisters, stealing Sir Wendell's kill. Move faster next time, Sir Wendell. Owen Norrie, a mountain clansman, laughed. He reached to the quiver on his back and drew the bowstring as far as he could. The small retreating figure of a Lannister levy was seen loose. The arrow whistled through the wind, tearing through the air and dug into the base of the man's neck. Owen drew another arrow, spotted his target, following the retreating knight on his high horse. From the corner of his eye, Daisy could be seen chasing after the same target as he wasn't going to let a woman get more kills than him. Again he let the arrow loose, but the winds changed the direction of the arrow, killing the knight's horse. Owen roared in frustration, drawing another arrow, letting loose. The knight was clearly hit by his arrow, but it also seemed that Daisy scored a hit as well. Owen could swear that he'd never seen a man in heavy armor fly so far. He sped ahead, following up with Sir Wendell and Small John Umber. The three of them killed any in their way, beating, crushing, shooting, and dicing their way to join their king. Truth be told, Robb was but a boy, and yet he was standing on a small pile of dead Lannister levies, with Grey Wind feasting on those who dared to come near his master. Don't think you're going to have all the fun without us, Sir Patrick. Mallister's voice echoed over the clanging rain next to him. Robb and Flint walked alongside him, and Rickard Riswell on the other side. 5 Lannisters rushed them, but the 3 burst into action. Rickard grabbed the cape of the first Lannister man at arms and dug his sword through the man's back. A shout of worry came from Robb and Flint, bringing Rickard's attention to the Lannister foot knight charging at him with a bastard sword. Rickard, with a quick thought, brought around the skewered Lannister, and the bastard sword was brought down on a comrade. The foot knight was appalled, crying out in fear. Robb and Flint took advantage of his weakness and jumped forward, digging his blade into the space between the helm and the foot knight's left pauldron behind them. Sir Patrick tore his blade from the final of the 5, leaving them all dead. Patrick laughed and motioned for the 2 men to follow after him. They were, after all, part of the king's personal battle companions. There were 30 of them at first, but 3 have been killed so far thanks to the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister during the Battle of the Whispering Wood almost 2 months ago. Nevertheless, those deaths only brought them closer as a team and a family. So far the Frey Knights were joining side by side with Daisy, surprisingly keeping up with that Mormont, almost all bear like her mother. That one. The men gathered together, following close to King Robb as he walked through the camp, disposing of any and all Lannister men that dared to come anywhere close to him. He moved with an expert grace, despite this being his first war. His iron crown, modeled after the crowns of the old kings of winter, never moved from its spot on his head of auburn locks now sticking to the bare nape of his neck. Robb was unstoppable. The young wolf was proving to be more than just a young wolf, more like a blood wolf. He was bloodthirsty, struck without remorse, not once hesitating if he saw a threat. He'll deal with it. The 6 battle companions tensed when the thumping sound of 2 horses sounded on either side of their king. Robb stopped, but didn't seem worried. He shouted something they couldn't hear, but Grey Wind surely understood him. The wolf took off in one direction while Robb Stark held his ground facing the other. Grey Wind jumped higher than any man and tackled a knight almost as large as the mountain himself and mauled into the knight's throat. The 6 companions flinched when the knight's horrific shrieks echoed into their ears. Before long his howls turned into white noise. Before disappearing completely, their heads turned to see the spear of the knight aimed at their king, but he didn't move once. Die boy, the knight roared. Suddenly Robb spun at the last second, swinging his sword with a wild arc, removing one of the legs. The horse shot forward, breaking the knight's predisposed arrogance and replacing it with what seemed to be a rag doll rolling around in the dirt. His armor clanked and the individual pieces scratched against each other with dirt and mud getting stuck in between the individual chainmail links. He drew his sword, all the while shaking in his steel armor. He raised the visor of his helmet with green eyes zooming left and right as dawn began to break and the storm began to lift. He hadn't known it, but it had been about 3 hours of fighting. The battle was over, and while the rest of his men had surrendered, he wasn't about to surrender to a boy. He shot forward, swinging his sword with a skilled stance. Robb jumped back, dodging his accurate lunges. Robb was tired, and he wasn't about to do something stupid like he almost did against the Kingslayer at the Whispering Wood. Stark men and the northern host began to build around them, dueling in the center of the battlefield. While this wasn't a major battle like the Whispering Wood, duels like this would increase moral and loyalty amongst the lords to each other and to him. Robb wasn't about to lose both the North and the Riverlands. He wasn't going to lose to some knight. He wasn't going to lose. Not once did he raise his sword. The knight kept swinging, though constantly aiming for his throat and face, but never actually meeting his mark. Rob could tell the knight was trying to keep his pompous appearance up for his captured men. He was tired, and Rob knew it. Over and over the knight kept attacking, knowing for a fact that the moment he breaks his aggressive tactics, Rob would take immediate advantage. The knight raised his free hand to his helmet and tossed it away, revealing a head of flowing dirty blonde hair and piercing green eyes. Common of a Lannister. I am Ser Loren Lannister of House Lannister, Lannisport Cadet Branch. The knight glared. If you defeat me, I ask on the honor of my family and the honor of my knighthood, treat my men with respect and dignity. I implore you, your grace. The Northmen crossed their arms, examining the situation. Was Robb Stark going to follow through with the honor that his father had, or was he going to forge a new name for himself? After all, the winter was coming and the crops back home needed to be harvested before winter snows came to fall. Robb finally raised his sword and removed his cloak, piercing icy blue eyes locked with piercing emerald green eyes. Robb nodded his head and simply said, I promise. Then give me the best fight you have to offer. Fort Highgarde, slightly smaller than Castle Stokeworth. The fort was recently erected and built to house Naruto's personal company. Joffrey, in all of his wise military genius, decided to cut down on the amount of men he could have at maximum 500 men in total. 50 cavalry, 100 archers, and 350 foot were all that was being allowed for him to command. Lord Jaron Stokeworth, Lord Richard Blunt, Sir Heron Rosby, Sir Harmon Buckwell of Antlers, Sir Anson Chelsted, and Sir Merrill Thorne were going to lead the rest of the southern battle force. Each one lead at least 1,000 men, with some leading personal armies that were well into the thousands. Naruto knew he'd received the short end of the stick, but he didn't care. He was going to use the small amount of men to his advantage. With only 500 men, they could be molded and brought together to follow only him and lose all respect and loyalty to their king. Joffrey. Naruto needed them at his side, at his back, and he needed them to trust each other and him, or else the battle plans he has set won't work properly, and in fact get all of them killed. An army is oiled smooth and in sync. If his men perform poorly, then the fault is with the subordinates. He fails again, the problem is with the commander. He wasn't about to let his new battle force fail. He wasn't going to let them drop that low. Behind him, Bran sat on the back of his horse, looking at least 5 years older than what he should look. Eye bags had grown, showing the stress he felt despite the death of his father being almost a month prior. Bran was exhausted. Naruto knew it, but he was also filled with a horrific fire and rage that was just waiting to find a target to be unleashed upon. Maybe a war was what the young Stark needed. What unnerved Naruto, though, was the pale hand constantly wrapped around the ornate handle of his arming sword. Bran's hair had grown, reaching to his shoulders and naturally curled. He was quieter and obviously angrier since his arrival to King's Landing. Bran had grown at least 5 inches, and the stress had turned his face into a more leaner, stronger appearance, but nowhere on the level of Naruto yet. While he was only 11, he looked 17, bordering onto manhood. Farther back there was a large muscled summer islander. He wore a suit of ring mail and wore a cape made from a myriad of colorful feathers. He was none other than the exiled Prince Jalabar Ho. He stuck out like a sore thumb compared to the rest of the recruits behind him. While many had skin tones ranging from pale to tan, Jalabar's skin was black, common skin tone for those of the Summer Isles. On his back was a quiver stocked full of arrows, each bearing a fletch of different color. His longbow wrapped around his chest with his war club and blade strapped to his sides. Naruto was a bit surprised at how easily the exiled prince agreed to join him and his little battle companion force. After all, with the small council constantly pushing Jalabar away because they believed him to simply be a beggar, Naruto saw potential, though, and wanted a man with his skills. Archers were needed, and Jalabar needed to get out of the castle and prove the potential that Naruto saw within him. To get the much-wanted support from the Iron Throne at the rear were at least 5 knights riding their horses behind them. Sir Andar Tellard, Sir Jared Smith, Sir Helman Hoper, Sir Douglas Hewitt, and Sir Warren Mercer. The 5 of them were originally hedge knights wandering with their squires, looking for someone to hire them. To Naruto it was too great of a deal to pass up. He'd met them at the tavern before leaving King's Landing a day ago. The 5 of them were drinking, wallowing, and talking about how boring their lives were. To Naruto that was more than perfect. That to him was more than enough reasoning to join him. After giving each 5,000 silvers, they immediately packed up and followed. Naruto knew that as long as money continued flowing, they'd stay loyal. That was the fun and easy thing about sellswords and hedge knights. Always pay them handsomely, or else you'll be the fool in the end. The troop has never seen Fort Highguard in their lives and didn't know what to expect. All they had to build on were the reports from Ser Delran and Lady Tarina. As of now, they journeyed through the dirt path, interlacing and cutting through the miles and miles of farmland surrounding Castle Stokeworth and Rosby. As far as they knew, the war hasn't reached this far north, with most of the fighting for the two Baratheon brothers being made throughout the Narrow Sea, to Shipbreaker Bay and along the Sea Watch. Going all the way to the east at Rainhouse, to the south at Mistwood, and to the west at Griffin's Roost. Most of the forests and villages within the countless leagues between the four holdfasts were most likely up in flames and littered with corpses. Shipbreaker Bay was definitely filled with raging flames and sinking ships bearing the sigils of both Stannis and Renly. Naruto was somewhat glad that they were concentrating too much on each other to send a force north to King's Landing despite their superior numbers. He looked throughout the land, eyeing the women working the fields. Since the men were off fighting the war, the fields went off in all directions, filled with wondrous colors of yellow and green. Wheat and barley waved in the soft wisps of wind, flowing like the waters of Blackwater Bay when there isn't a bloody storm. Naruto turned and took in the sight of a silent but contemplating form of Bran Stark. His eyes were locked with the waves of wheat. It was almost like a sea of gold. Edible gold. Bran stared, lips twitching, threatening to curl. Thanks to the calming scene before him, Naruto smiled softly and turned his head back around, keeping his eyes on the road. Suddenly the sound of clomping hooves echoed in his ears. Yo, Naruto! Sasuke's voice sounded. I found a horse. Guh. Naruto facepalmed, struggling to keep with reality. Why are you here? And by the gods, where did you get a fucking horse? I don't really know. Sasuke laughed. I imagined one and I got one. Well, we've been traveling for almost a day. Fort Highguard should be coming up soon. Naruto called out to his troop, keep your eyes out for wooden walls and a wooden keep. I don't see wooden walls, but I see banners bearing a fox's head. My lord, Ser Andar called. You did say your force was called Fox Company. I suppose that's it. Naruto's brows narrowed. This fort isn't supposed to be so well made and complete yet. I thought it was just recently built. You'd be surprised how fast castles and keeps can be built. Ser Jared laughed. On our way to King's Landing there were at least 6 different construction sites of new forts and castles. Many of them were already well on their way to being half finished. King Joffrey is building more castles to help raise more and house more troops. Ser Helmand sighed. By the way things are going, most of Westeros will be in this royal army. I heard that Essosi were emigrating to King's Landing and the Crownlands thanks to Joffrey's offer. Ser Douglas added, as far as I know at least 300,000 Pentoshi Lorati Myrish Lysini and Tyroshi arrived in the port of Duskendale and King's Landing. The women and children are filling in the farmlands and the men are filling in the openings in the royal army. Now we're inviting foreigners. Ser Warner sighed. No offense to you Jalabar, I just don't trust those free city folk. It'll pass. Ser Warner, Naruto called out, wiping his face, rubbing his bare fingertips against the scars on his face. Foreigners can't be too bad. Who goes there? A rather weakly sounding voice echoed from the stone battlement. Naruto looked unimpressed. His blue eyes trailed up and down, eyeing the arrowheads poking through the crunnels lining up and down the height of the battlements. Half of the arrows didn't even seem like they were going to even go anywhere. The other half weren't even placed against the bow correctly. Naruto fought the urge to roll his eyes and rode towards the gate. The same man from before roared that he was warning him to stop. Naruto laughed and continued along. Suddenly an arrow shot from one of the crunnels but missed Naruto by at least 2 feet. Bran's worried look immediately washed away and was replaced with a deadpan disappointment, clearly reminding him of his lack in that area of expertise. The man was screaming this time, his voice cracking, clearly having a frog stuck in his throat. The gate opened anyway, revealing Ser Delran, Lady Tarina, and Lady Sorsha waiting with big smiles on their faces. Within moments the troop was led into the fort and their horses were whisked away to the stables on the far side of the courtyard. Naruto looked around. Dummies lined up for spear training, sword training, and targets were lined up against the eastern wall for archery practice. The men were running and doing exercises while others were working on their spear thrust and sword swing. In the center though was the atrocious state of Fox Company's archers. Jalabar had never been so quickly disappointed in a fighting force in his life. Moving along, Naruto came to realize both men and women made up Fox Company. He raised an eyebrow at Lady Tarina, wondering if this was a part of her doing. He looked. About half the women were vicious fighters while the other half were slightly better at archery than most of the men, maybe because they felt that they had something to prove. Naruto and Bran froze in their steps, watching one woman handle 2 knives as if they were toys she twirled them in between her fingers and spun them around her hands with near perfection. She turned with lightning-fast reflexes, and the two knives embedded into the bullseye of a target 10 yards away. Two more targets 120 yards, and the last 30 yards she drew out two more knives and held them almost as if she was giving instruction. Naruto finally took notice of the four women, and the 8 men holding their knives watching her every move. She swung her right arm with lightning speed and shot her left arm around, nearly snapping the wind in her wake. Naruto and Bran watched with amazement as the two knives embedded bullseye as well. She turned to the men and women and clapped her hands together, immediately making them have hands-on experience. They hurled their knives, some outright tossing them. No knives made it even 5 yards. She sighed and had them retrieve their knives for another go. Having lost interest, both Naruto and Bran continued along, following after the rest of the companion guards. Ser Delran had just finished explaining everything that was going on, from schedules to training regimens, both of which were quite ridiculous. Sasuke leaned against the wooden railing and smirked at Naruto's blank face when he caught wind of Ser Delran's planned training style. "You know, Naruto," Sasuke said once everyone took off in different directions, "the Naruto I knew would jump at the chance of training. It's not that I'm not excited." Naruto glared and crossed his arms, leaning against the railing as well. "I'm just worried. What if I can't lead these warriors? What if you can?" Sasuke asked with a smile. "Who's to know really? The Naruto I knew had a strange charisma about him, an ability have you aside from chakra, of course, that made people want to follow him. All you've gotta do is channel that inner you. You make less and less sense the more you talk to me." Naruto deadpanned. "Maybe you should start listening more and paying attention more, and we might not have this problem." Sasuke bellowed out with laughter. "Don't worry, Naruto, I may be a spirit or whatever, but I still have my powers. If we train enough, we can work together as if we were a single person. My Sharingan can predict someone's movements before they even do it, so that'll be a plus to have at your side." "So you mean we work on my reaction time?" Naruto asked. "Exactly," Sasuke smirked. "I can scream as loud as I want to, since no one but you will hear me. After all, in the midst of a chaotic battle, you'll need all the help you can get." "I thought that you'd never ask." Naruto groaned. "Oh well, I guess training will have to take precedence." Rob cracked his knuckles and stared at the map in front of him. It's been a week since he'd defeated Ser Loren Lannister in the field, and the Vale men kept their promise. They indeed arrived with 10,000 men at the back of Lord Yone Royce. Rob was surprised to see a man like Lord Yone. He was stronger and older than what he'd imagined. He was indeed far more terrifying than what the stories told. He knew his father and was a great friend of him, so a friend of his late father's was a friend of Rob's. The main camp of the northern host had swollen from about 17,000 men to a little more than 27,000 men. It was definitely an army to behold, especially against the supposed might of the Westerlands. Rob looked at the war map, staring at the falcon pieces sitting behind the Bloody Gate, the only land entrance to the Vale of Arryn. His eyes trailed over to the various lion pieces standing watch on the Golden Tooth and already encircled on Pink Maiden. Once again, over the mountains of the Westerlands, various yellow lion pieces were placed to represent the growing threat of Joffrey's royal army that just so happens to grow with each passing day and week. Rob was glad that Joffrey decided to take on Stannis instead of aiding his grandfather. He needed to think of something out of the ordinary, something so confusing that Lord Tywin will never see it coming. Umber was arguing with Glover again over the course of action: break the siege over Pink Maiden to continue the foothold in the Westerlands, or break the sieges of Derry and Maidenpool. Both were gateways to the rest of the Kingsroad. Whomever held the two had perfect openings through the Kingsroad into Riverrun, to the Twins, and to Winterfell. Joffrey's forces, though, were noted to have split into thirds, while still large in size, 1/3 heading south to fight the Tyrell/Baratheon alliance, another to fight House Baratheon of Dragonstone, and the final was a small contingency force to fight the North. Rob stared at the map. Joffrey was stupid, but the Stark was certain that the boy king was receiving help for battle plans, most likely his grandfather giving him orders. Rob kept staring at the current borders between the North and the Southron nations. An inaudible spiteful laugh escaped his lips. What borders? There was no distinction between North and South anymore. Half the Riverlands are up in flames, the other half crawling with soldiers or littered with dead ones. He needed to redirect the fight elsewhere, because if this destruction continues, there won't be a free North and Trident to be fighting for. Royce spoke with Umber and Manderley, trying to come up with a cohesive battle plan. Lady Lisa, Aaron's sister to Catelyn Stark and aunt to the king in the North, had promised Robb full command of her forces if he manages to bring her the imp Tyrion Lannister, or at least some Lannister purebred to blame the assassination of her husband on. preferably Tyrion. She was very specific on that regard. Robb mused 20,000 Vale men were going to be at his command along with the 30,000 he currently had. Robb felt that he would faint if the deal went to pass. Now that his army was growing too large, it was time to start giving out official ranks amongst the lordship under his employ. Robb straightened eyes, struggling to pry away from the war map. "My lords," Robb said with a strong tone. "Your grace." The lords and Lady Meech bowed. "We've grown large in size, and one man can't control it all on his own." Robb said, "I'll need generals and a marshal. We need to organize our forces while Tywin Lannister licks his wounds. I say we charge through the Westerlands and shove our swords up their bungholes and put an end to this war as soon as possible." Great John proclaimed, getting a large resounding cry of approval from various Northman lords and a few Riverlands lords. "As much as I'd love to do that, Lord Umber," Robb said with a sigh escaping his lips. "Besieging Casterly Rock would cost men and resources. We have the men but not the resources. But once we take Casterly Rock, we still need to worry about Lannisport, the hub of all Lannister commerce and economy, undoubtedly heavily guarded, more so than King's Landing." "Probably is. It's easy to say, Lord Umber, but it's an entirely different story when it comes to actually doing it. Joffrey has the King's Road completely under his royal army's control," Robb said, bringing his finger to trace all along the Crownlands. "Lord Tywin marches back to consolidate his forces and regroup. Last report of it I read, he was heading to either the ruins of Castamere, Casterly Rock, or Harrenhal. If I've known enough about that man, I'd say he'd go to the latter of the three with his full force." "What are you planning, Your Grace?" Lord Yohn Royce asked with a raised brow. "You can't mean to lay siege on Harrenhal against a force almost as large as our own?" "That's exactly what I mean to do," Robb smirked. "Lord Tywin is the calculating type. I know for a fact that he'll be expecting another ruse like the Battle of Whispering." "Would you mean another bait army?" Great John asked, appalled by the implications. "I think we've lost enough men to suicidal plans. The difference is Lord Tywin will be expecting a bait army." Robb kept smiling, bringing his personal wolf piece and moved it along with two more wolf pieces on either flank, but he won't expect the king in the north waiting for him in the field of battle. "Your Grace." The lords were in uproar. Many shot to their seats, begging Robb to reconsider. Many immediately offered themselves up to lead the bait army, but Robb simply raised his hand, and the entire tent silenced. The lords took their seats and slid into place, quiet as a mouse. Their hearts were racing. The one hope of a free north was willing to practically sacrifice himself for the sake of their freedom and their liberty and their cause. Lord Yohn Royce. Robb looked at the man with a stern eye. "You will be the marshal for the entire army starting from this day and onward." "Lord Great John Umber." "Lord Rickard Karstark." "Lord Roose Bolton." "Lord Galbart Glover." "You four will the generals that will aid the marshal in making and approving battle plans as of now as your king. These orders are final. The battle companions I have with me need to be replenished to their former size of 30 so far. I've lost 3. My son and nephews are more than ready to join you in battle." "Your Grace." Lord Royce quickly nodded. "Tell them to meet at the war tent at sundown to be introduced with the rest of my battle companions," Robb said absent-mindedly. "Now here is the plan, my lords. My personal company, the Howling Wolves as I'll start calling it, will be in the vanguard of this trifold attack," Robb said, moving the pieces into place. "Lord Stefan Fry will lead 4,000 men on the right flank, with the famous Fry pikemen. My great-uncle Brynden Blackfish Tully will lead the left flank with a force of 4,000 men as well. This cart that you see is to represent an important gold and silver coin shipment to Casterly Rock," Robb said sadly. "Thanks to a few well-placed bandit raids, the caravan is forced to head north towards Harrenhal. That is, when we strike, we're not attacking to loot, we're attacking to draw Lord Tywin out of hiding behind the walls of Harrenhal. We agitate his borders enough, he'll have no choice but to leave the comfort of his keep and meet us out on the field." Robb smiled and moved 3 lion pieces from what seemed to be the map interpretation of Harrenhal. "As you can see, there's still a lion head waiting in garrison. That is the garrison that you, Lord Royce, will take advantage of." Robb pushed the 5 lion heads to chase after the 3 wolf heads north towards the fields around Derry. He quickly reached around and slid the falcon piece across the field and left the falcon in wait in front of the lion piece still waiting above Harrenhal. Robb smirked and crossed his arms, nodding at each lord present. None said a word, knowing that there was more to this plan than what Robb was letting on. The king fixed his crown slightly and bent over, moving 4 wolf pieces to swerve along the Red Fork towards Harrenhal through the forest. "No matter how big the army is, no one gets seen in that forest, unless you intend to be seen, as you can see, Lord Roose." Lord Umber You two will have to lead a force from the western wall and smash against the western flank of the Lannister garrison. Robb smirked. The signal will be a bright Lannister banner lit in flames. Understand? Wait, signal for what? Lord Roose asked, clearly curious of this entire endeavor. Another attack? Nope. Robb wrapped his hands around the falcon piece and the wolf pieces and turned them around, and slid them a few centimeters away from Harrenhal. A signal for a retreat? Are you daft? Lord Yon asked, wide-eyed and ego potentially damaged. A retreat hasn't been made since the first siege of Maidenpool. I have good reason, Robb said with a glare. Watch, the garrison in Harrenhal will be weak and ill man thanks to my previous ruse to pull Lord Tywin out of the breach. Now with the signal given, Lord Yon, you and the Northman forces behind you are to come as fast as you can towards the fields around Derry, and close the gap surrounding Lord Tywin's main force. Not only will we gain Harrenhal, the greatest foothold to receive since it crosses over into the Riverlands, the Crownlands and the Westerlands, but there's that chance that we'll kill Lord Tywin in battle. Looking at the map once again, the 5 lion pieces were surrounded from all sides by 6 wolf pieces trapped and caged. The Harrenhal garrison, 1 lion piece, was surrounded by 4 wolf pieces. The chances of defeating Tywin Lannister in the field were too great to pass up. Crusading down into the Westerlands was going to be a terrible idea that would only cause attrition amongst the men, and with attrition came disease and terrible moral, neither of which were going to bode well for Robb's plans. But a sudden contingency appeared in his head. But Robb suddenly spoke, getting the attention of the lords present. We'll manage to get Lord Tywin's forces into the trap. There's still a chance that he'll escape the moment he feels that Harrenhal is in danger of attack, and that will be another chance to defeat him. We'll have him cornered from all ends. If I'm right, he'll escape from the battle the moment he realizes that this is just a diversion, but in truth the attack on Harrenhal will be the diversion. Understand? He'll leave battle and fight to hold on to Harrenhal, the only other city that commands great respect and power other than King's Landing. Robb continued, Lord Yon, the garrison will be taken care of by the Bolton and Umber forces coming over the western wall. Set up foe siege equipment and projectiles to hurl at the garrison to keep them busy, while the rest of the force you have sets up ambush points throughout the forest and the waters nearby. Cavalry will have to wait in the reserves within the forests until I arrive. Understand? You arrive? Lord Galbart Glover asked with narrowed eyes. Yes, my lord. Robb sighed. When he goes on the run, I'll reallocate my forces and charge at his already exhausted rear. Former vanguard, they'll be suffering attrition, and they'll be easier to cut down if Lord Tywin escapes. My uncle Edmure and Lord Dustin will be waiting along the Red Fork with a force of 8,000 men ready to intercept. This is going to be the hardest fought battle of this war to date. Some of us will die, but I pray to the old gods that we survive to continue fighting for our homes and our freedoms. No longer will the corrupted Lannister-controlled Iron Throne rule over us. Time skip. Bran awoke feeling energized beyond belief. For some strange reason, with a quick motion the bed furs were thrown from his body and onto the floor below. Summer replied with a low groan, giving his master a small look of discomfort. The Stark shrugged and threw his cloak over his shoulders, wrapping his belt around his waist with his sword strapped to his side. His brown eyes traced left and right, finding the lions and stags a bit of an eyesore. For a long while he was a wolf stuck amongst lions and stags, his hand wrapped tightly around the handle of his sword as he trudged through the halls of the keep, nodding his head at the various men and women he passed. There were well-armored knights and men-at-arms that belonged to the lords of the Crownlands and the Westerlands, but then there were those dressed in leather cuirass with leather lapels dropping over their thighs, bearing no protective ability. The gap between the men and women of the royal army was so obvious that it hurt the young Stark's head. Thoughts of Winterfell came to mind. Every Levian man-at-arms was dressed the same, given the same armament, and even received the same training with this royal army. These men and women were picked up, conscripted, and given a bastardized version of the training regimen used by the whole of Westeros save for Dorne. Of course, the one thing he felt he can thank Naruto for, his banner didn't have the blasted golden lion of House Lannister. Oh, how Bran hated that lion. Oh, how he hated his former hero Jaime Lannister. Oh, how he hated all of the blonde-haired shits. He gritted his teeth with Summer following suit when the two quickly became the targets of innate stares from some of the Lannister loyalists. Brandon, a deep voice echoed from down the hall. How would you like to join me in breaking fast? Almost immediately all heads turned away, with the men and women going back to what they were doing. Bran quickly turned his head to lock his brown eyes with the powerful black eyes of none other than Jalabhar Ho, the exiled Summer Islander that Naruto recruited. Before leaving King's Landing, the prince walked with his quiver already strapped to his back with his bow wrapped around his chest. I don't see why not. Bran turned and walked alongside the tall Summer Islander. Many rumors and tales were told to the young Stark of the Summer Islanders. None of them spoke any good about the dark-skinned neighbors of Westeros. Jalabhar seemed completely different from the stories, though save for his exceptional skill with a bow, Bran felt that the man was so good he might even give Theon a good challenge. Brandon, is this your first battle? Jalabhar asked as they were served wooden plates of bacon, eggs and bread. I want to make sure you have the skills to survive. I've been in a fight with the Lannisters a few times. Bran looked down at his food. Have you killed yet? Jalabhar asked, putting the steaming bacon in between his thick lips. I have a vivid flash shot through his mind, reliving the moment he took the lives of those men. He took a deep breath, signifying his discomfort. It is nothing to worry about. Brandon. Jalabhar nodded his head and reached over, placing his large hand on Bran's shoulder. I'll be watching over you. We all will. You seem so sure of yourself. Bran took a fork, digging into the eggs. Have you fought in battles before? Of course I have. Jalabhar laughed heartily. I have fought in more battles than any of you Westerosi have in the last 10 years. Jalabhar sighed. The rush the power one feels in battle is exhilarating. For almost 8 years I've fought for my seat of the Red Flower Vale, and for almost 8 years I've shed blood. Why'd you end up here? Bran asked, completely taken by his story. I lost the war. Jalabhar replied dejectedly. I was hopelessly outnumbered, and I came here hoping King Robert would sympathize with my cause, but I was constantly denied by the Queen. Now here I am promised by Prince Naruto that I'd receive my throne once more. Bran stayed silent, his brown eyes locking with his food. Once more Naruto made a promise before a promise that was painfully broken. Shattered. The Stark quickly pushed those thoughts down to the recesses of his mind, making sure that he never thought like that again. Naruto was doing all he can for them, and this was how he was going to repay his goodwill. The two ate in silence with Summer's slow growls and grumbles. Jalabhar looked at Bran to see his thinking expression spread across his face, wrought with anger and fear at the same time. The Summer Islander rose from his seat and stretched his back, the feathers and ornate colors dancing with his shivering body. Bran and Jalabhar got the Stark's attention, breaking his glare. How would you like me to teach you how to shoot like a Summer Islander? The winds were cool and crisp, itching with the feeling of winter. The bed furs shuffled slightly in the room. Birds chirped and sang, bringing life to the fortress. Hammers were banging away in the smithy with commands roared back and forth. It was daybreak, and the one person who shouldn't be oversleeping did anyway. Naruto, wake up, you're missing the war. Sasuke shouted. I'm awake. Naruto shot from his bed, hair spiky, shooting in all directions with his bangs flowing down to cover his eyes from view. He shivered softly, but his chakra quickly flared, filling his body with a warmth that can only be described as perfection. A hand rose tentatively, rubbing his face. His fingers traced the scars marring his face, but nevertheless Naruto rose from his bed and went through his morning stretches, making sure he didn't cramp up today. He was going to make sure his men were ready for the battle ahead. While he himself has never really been in a real battle before, he was confident that Ser Delran and Lady Tarina could handle readying the men and women for combat. But he froze for a moment. How Joffrey was intending to make an army serve both men and women. Naruto didn't know. The prince just wanted to make sure nothing bad happened, given what he'd seen from Arya and what even Sansa managed to force out. He was fairly certain that these men and women can fight together as equals despite their gender differences. Naruto threw his yellow and black light plate armor over his chest and shut the clasps, locking the breastplate in place with a quick, swift motion. Naruto wrapped his belt around his waist along with his bastard sword. Sasuke, our tag team needs work. Naruto sighed and looked to the Uchiha with a blank look on his face. I don't know why, but my reaction time just isn't as fast as yours. How can I change that? It'll take work, but we can do it. Sasuke adopted a thoughtful expression. How would you like to get pelted with training arrows? Gods no. Naruto quickly declined. The blunted swords was enough pain from Ser Jared and Ser Dougras. Something not as painful. I can't think of anything that can help. Sasuke sighed. Usually we just channel our chakra, but you don't have good enough chakra coils to maintain the flow. If anything, using chakra to increase your skills will only reveal your powers too soon and inadvertently turn all of Westeros into your enemy. From what I've seen, these Westerosi don't like what they don't understand, so you're basically saying I'm fucked. Naruto took a deep breath, releasing a wistful sigh. How am I going to get the Starks home and win this war? Just keep practicing, Naruto. Sasuke laughed. Come on, the men are probably waiting for you in the courtyard. Naruto left his room silent as a fox. He wasn't greeted by his lieutenants, or anyone for that Mata the prince though felt at peace and trudged along ignoring the interior silence of Fort Highguard. Sasuke had disappeared, slightly hurting Naruto since he was finally starting to disappear more. It had been almost a week that they'd been in Fort Highguard. Information and orders flowed in every single day that Tyrells were held back. Renly Baratheon was held back. Stay put, don't engage. Consolidate, attack, advance, push through their lines. Forget the previous orders. Renly Baratheon is on the move. Lord Randall Tarly is on his way. Lord Randall Tarly is on the retreat. Naruto shook his head in despair. The information network that the Iron Throne had was rather atrocious, with information coming from the Spider and information coming from the scouts of at least 10 different lords and commanders. This was a new royal army, and Naruto knew that this was all one big miscommunication mess. From the latest report, Lord Randall Tarly was on his way to Tumbleton and would arrive within 3 weeks with a host of 8,000, which was from the Spider. Of course, another report, one from scouts of Lord Thorn's forces, said he was heading to the Dornish marches and Starpike. Naruto froze in his step when his eyes landed on a familiar figure. Her hair was brown, and her waist was covered in shimmering knives. It was none other than that knife expert from a few days prior. He was looking all over for her since he arrived, but no one apparently knew where she went. He rushed ahead and quickly reached forward and pulled her shoulder, forcing her to face him. All he saw were her chocolate brown eyes, while the rest of her face was covered in a mask. Her shimmering eyes quickly looked away from the prince. Hey, Naruto smiled. I was impressed by your skill with knives and I wanted to congratulate you. What's your name? Caroline Smith, the woman replied and bowed softly. I am grateful of your praise, Lord. I hope to impress you more within the coming months. I have to ask though. Naruto paused. Why do you wear a mask? When I was young I twirled my knife wrong, Caroline replied quietly. My face is ruined by my own mistake and carelessness. Really? Naruto asked with wide eyes. I lost my grip, Lord. Caroline sighed. I am sure you know what it's like to lose your grip. Hold on. Naruto pressed his hands on his waist. How is a smithy's daughter knowledgeable of knife play? You'd be surprised of what many of us in Flea Bottom know. Caroline laughed and walked off, her hands resting softly on her hips. Lord, will you stand there or will you come out and train the troops? Wait, I have more questions. Rob could see them in broad daylight. His men shuffled nervously behind him. For 6 days straight he and the Howling Wolves have harassed the Lannister outer defenses, going from Derry and around to Old Heron Town, all around the God's Eye. Rob had destroyed, sacked and slaughtered any and all Lannister footholds, all the while with Lord Tywin's personal host right at his heels. The Lannisters were closing in and Robb was getting worried that he might be getting too ahead of himself, but this was the place known as Fort Harston, housing 800 men and knights loyal to House Lannister. Robb needed to tear it down, or at least put it to the torch from his vantage point over the battlefield. Lord Karstark was making great progress, defeating the Lannisters' sallied troops. From his last report of Lord Tywin's force, the Lannister Patriarch was pulling more troops from the Harrenhal garrison to join in on his personal host. That could only mean that Robb needed to be as careful as he could with this strategy. He couldn't risk getting wounded or worse, dying. With most of the Crownlands slowly going up in flames, Robb's plans and the Lords and pieces were finally falling into place. Thankfully, they weren't in the middle of the fight right now. Robb felt that he and the companions needed a break. So far, the contingency he'd sent backing Lord Karstark was succeeding in keeping the Lannister forces busy. Karstark banners, along with those of their bannermen, waved in the winds of battle, washing away the disappearing banners of House Lannister. It was a slow process, but Robb could already taste victory. Fort Harston was already beginning to collapse beneath the weight of his forces. The stone walls and wooden watchtowers were lit ablaze, or torn down in the heat of battle. Strength and skill can always topple strength and numbers. Robb has proven that fact over and over throughout the course of this war. It was a fact he was intending to prove as much as he needed to, but now his numbers were growing with each passing day, making their forces near matched through the help and wise counsel of his marshal and generals. While he had proven his own battle prowess, he needed to prove the strength and skill of his army. It wasn't a form of morale boost, it was propaganda. He wanted the Lannisters to fear the direwolf sigil of House Stark. He wanted the Southron lords to run at the very sight. No, the very mention of House Stark through fire and blood was the only way, for winter is coming and there was no place for the lions of the South. Daisy sat in her saddle, blank-faced, with her heart racing through her chest. The rest of the battle companions sat uncomfortably. Robb was clearly restless. Runner, Robb suddenly said. The leaves and bushes rustled as men shouted for a runner. Robb didn't look back. Keeping his eyes glued to the battle in front of him, the leaves rustled once more, revealing none other than a skinny woman wearing rags and a pair of breeches. She bowed before her king and straightened up when she met his dark icy blue gaze. Her king took a deep breath and gave her a stern expression. "Get down there and tell Lord Karstark that he's to exact his revenge on the Lannisters." Robb spoke with a dark tone. "Why, your grace?" the woman asked. "Tell him to kill them all right." He strafed, dodging the incoming blade by mere millimeters. Duck, he shot to the ground, kicking up dirt in his wake. "Get back up, two are coming through the cloud." Almost immediately he rose to his feet, grabbed his wooden sword and stood in defense. The first closed the distance with a near-perfect precision. The second followed up, clearing what the first missed. "Back around, get them to strike each other." Naruto gave Sasuke a look of confusion, but the Uchiha simply gave the same order. Naruto dodged a quick lunge and rammed his fist into Sir Warren's jaw. Sir Helman charged ahead, sword drawn and ready, swinging almost wildly without a single pattern in mind. Sasuke followed each attack and swing with his Sharingan. Suddenly his eyes picked up on what they were planning. Naruto, Jalabhar and Bran are drawing their bows. Sasuke quickly stated, "Take down Sir Warren and take his shield. I'll tell you what to do, so listen closely and move as fast as you can understand." "You got it," Naruto responded with a resounding mental roar. Warren swung down onto Naruto with his sword, leaving his torso open. Naruto grabbed him by the waist and pulled him to the ground. Helman tried to protect Warren, but Naruto was too fast, channeling his chakra through his arms. Naruto pulled the shield from the knight's arm and strapped it to his own in less than 2 seconds, nearly surprising Helman to a halt. Whistle. Naruto raised the shield at the perfect moment. He could feel the arrows punching into the shield's surface, but thankfully the shield was made from heavy aspen wood. He took a deep breath, jumping back to create a pocket of distance between him and his two melee opponents. Helman reached down, pulling Warren to his feet. Both were equally surprised, if not dumbstruck, by their liege's performance. Jalabhar had an eyebrow permanently raised, having never seen something like that. "I can do better than that," a woman's voice echoed from the other side of their sparring circle. It was none other than Carline. She walked up into the sparring circle with an air of superiority about her. Her hands were slowly twitching as she approached the men. Lady Tarina was cleaning her broadsword with an arak sitting at her side. The veteran warrior looked up with an eyebrow raised at the newcomer. Even her tiger companion Lady Sorsha looked interested at what was to come. Tarina sheathed her broadsword, leaning into her seat next to the blacksmith, smirking at what was to come. As far as she knew, this Carline Smith, if that was even her real name, was an experienced knife fighter and was far more skilled than any she'd ever laid eyes upon. She was certain her prince was going to get one hell of a fight his way. From a first glance, Carline looks and walks like a Westerosi, but upon closer inspection to her fighting style, be it weapons or hand-to-hand, she fights like an Essosi. How someone as young as her learned to fight like a near master was beyond Tarina. Sir Warren and Helman stifled their laughter. Sure, they saw how good with throwing knives the woman was, but they doubted that someone so frail-looking could defeat the prince, a proven fighter. Despite the lack of actual battle experience, the woman walked with a brisk pace, inching at the knives strapped to her hips. Her eyes were trailing left and right, trying her best to prove her skill. She stopped and rested her hands on her hips. "Sir Helman, Sir Warren, I want to fight you too as well," she smirked. "I'll show you that the swift movements of a woman can defeat the strength men seem to always covet." "Oh, I like her," Tarina shouted out with a powerful guffaw. Naruto glared at the Essosi woman and turned back to his cocky opponent. "Yes, she's great with knives, but there was no way that she could defeat the three of them." He had two hedge knights that were practiced and tempered by battle with Sasuke and his all-seeing Sharingan. To top it off, he glared at the woman, who'd managed to get the attention of almost everyone awake, including a large group of female archers making their practice shots all around from the battlements and the training circles. Men and women turned to face the duel. "When do you want to begin?" Carline asked with an innocent tone. Now Helman and Warren rushed from the flanks, trying to close the distance as soon as possible. Carline wasn't going to have any of that, though. With a quick motion and flick of her wrists, two knives shot from her waist and whizzed through the air, taking their helmets from their heads with near skin grazing distance. Warren ducked, spinning on the ball of his heel, while Helman continued his charge forward. Carline ducked, sliding her left foot through the dirt, kicking up a small cloud into Warren's face. Naruto took this as his cue to join the fight. She dodged Helman's lunge with graceful ease and palmed his wrist, breaking his grip on the hedge knight's sword. Tarina rose from her seat, narrowing her eyes at the fighting style was seeing. Carline jumped back, pulling the black scarf wrapped around Sir Helman's neck. The knight roared out, cursing his heavy armor. Carline thought she was safe for the moment, but just as she stepped her foot against the back of his head, Sir Warren appeared with a glare on his face and lunged with a power strike, nearly sticking Carline like a pork sausage. She smirked at his movements. Classic Westerosi garbage. She surmised the Westerosi prized size and strength above all things given their use of heavy armor and heavy weaponry. She shook her head, eyeing the many sweat drops already beginning to trickle down Ser Warren's cheeks. Now's the time. Naruto. Sasuke's voice echoed within his head. Got it. Naruto dashed from behind, making as little noise as possible. He jumped for Carline's back and tackled the woman to the ground just as Ser Helman began to push himself off the ground. Naruto made the mistake of moving his eyes from his target. Don't underestimate me. Carline shot her elbow up into the unsuspecting Baratheon's jaw, forcing him off of her torso. She shot up as fast as she could, rolling away like an assassin. Ser Warren lifted his shield and slowly walked up to the elusive woman, eyeing her like a piece of meat, green eyes locked with chocolate brown, trying to examine her stance. As far as he could tell, she had none. That only complicated things. Naruto stood holding his busted lip, smearing the blood against his chin. His blue eyes were ablaze with a fury Carline had never seen. She kept that fear pressed down so as to not show weakness. Helman roared for his squires. Naruto's eyebrow quirked when three teenagers appeared and began to remove Helman's heavy armor. He wore a simple lever jerkin with steel-guarded breeches. Another squire arrived with his heavy greatsword. Warren gave Helman a smirk and called his own squires. It didn't take long, but Warren now held his broadsword and shield free of his heavy armor, weighing him down. Naruto sighed and shifted his weight uncomfortably. These two were probably going to try and kill her. Well, she did throw knives at them. Sasuke piped. Should I use live steel? Naruto asked. Do what you think you should do, Sasuke replied with his usual ambiguous tone. Besides, I'm just the guy trying to keep you alive in battle. Bran, Naruto called. Right ahead of you. Naruto. Bran tossed the Baratheon his bastard sword. Carline's eyes trailed the glinting blade as it flew through the air and into the prince's hands. A small smirk began to prey upon her masked face. They were going to get serious. Naruto swung his blade around, cutting the wind in his wake. His blue eyes locked with her chocolate brown orbs. She was certain he was going to go for the kill. Carline chuckled softly and slowly brought her hands to her hips, sliding her fingertips against the handles of her throwing knives, trailing back and forth at her opponents. She managed to pinpoint certain areas that they were weak. Naruto didn't have a shield, but for some reason beyond her, he can dodge projectiles like nothing. Ser Warren was free from his heavy armor, slowing him down, leaving him easily 10 times faster than before. She narrowed her eyes at Ser Helman. He was the slowest but the most resilient. That was with his armor. She couldn't even begin to imagine what the man could do now that his armor was removed. Who wants to go first? Carline asked with a cocky disposition. Helman and Warren gave each other a quick glance before charging at the knife thrower with as much power as they could muster. Helman swung first, but Carline easily dodged the two of them, grinding their assault to a halt. Warren moved too far, leaving him open from behind. Carline grabbed him by the back of the neck, pulling his tunic along. He yelped in surprise, but was far more surprised by her amazing strength. She forced him to the ground, ready to stomp his face and forward. Naruto lunged at the woman, lost in her combat trance, breaking her attack with near perfection. Left Naruto smirked at Sasuke's plans. The Baratheon swung for her left, forcing her right side. Unprotected Helman took quick advantage of this and rushed forward, swinging for her seemingly bare right flank. It looked like it was over, but his sword clashed with the curved blade common to an Iraq. Lady Tarina smirked at Ser Helman and swung his sword back around. Are you so weak that you need 3 men to fight 1 woman? Lady Tarina asked her Iraq, poised for an attack. Carline, you've done well. It's time to even the odds. Lady Sword shot to me. Naruto's eyes darkened with a deadpan expression growing across his features. He grasped the handle of his bastard sword, awaiting the inevitable charge of the massive tiger. Ser Warren and Ser Helman gasped in surprise. She was going to pull her trump card this soon. Nonetheless, the 2 hedge knights tightened their grip on their swords and stood as steady as they could be, like a mountain and be as fluid as a river, something that Naruto beat into their heads. Of course, it wasn't as easy as Naruto said. They were knights who bore the heaviest armor and the heaviest weapons. To fight women like this, though, was like suicide. Lady Tarina was a practiced and so far one of the most terrifying women they've met aside from Carline. Lady Tarina. Naruto smiled, standing between the 2 hedge knights. Are you certain you want to fight all of us? I've gotten better. Last we fought Prince Naruto, I defeated you rather easily. The Asosi burst into laughter, much to Naruto's ire. Ser Delran and Bran were snickering. It was a fact that she practically handed him his arse on a silver platter, but that was the past and this is the now. He didn't have an annoying but ridiculously useful specter at his side. The blonde prince spun his sword around, twirling it with an expert tinge that had many watching in awe. In the eyes of his troops he was a prince, but now he was more than that. He was showing a skill that many of them wished they had, unbeknownst to the Baratheon. He was slowly raising the morale of his troops just through this little practice spar. Prepare yourself, Naruto cried, raising his bastard sword above his head. I won't show mercy, Naruto. Throw some knives at Sorsha to distract her towards Sir Helman, Sasuke said, sternly assessing the situation. Why not draw her out and the three of us take her down together? Naruto asked, you three aren't coordinated enough for that just yet. Sasuke narrowed his eyes. Just do what I said, you got it. Naruto rushed forward, sword poised. Caroline watched him with calculating eyes. She clearly thought he was going to do something as stupid as charge right into her. Despite already feeling the effects of what happens, her fingers were wrapped in between knives and handles, ready to take the sword from his hands. Suddenly he brought his sword down and hurled a pair of knives at Lady Sorsha, forcing the tiger to reposition closer to Lady Tarina. The flanks were broken with Sir Helman and Sir Warren bearing down on specifically Lady Tarina. Caroline knew this and had to make a split decision. Naruto was coming right for her, and without Lady Sorsha she wasn't sure she could move fast enough to continue a close quarters fight with the Baratheon. Naruto took notice of her shimmering eyes and shot his foot forward, kicking her gut. In her moment of confusion he pushed her to the ground, bastard sword to her neck. She'd lost in a mere second due to her thinking too hard. Naruto's eyes turned to see Sir Warren tackle Lady Sorsha with Sir Helman in a stalemate with Lady Tarina. It seems I've won. Naruto smiled. What happened? I put her in a genjutsu. Sasuke smirked. She was going to take that sword out of your hands if I didn't do anything. Thank you for that, Sasuke. Naruto laughed. I've done my part. The Uchiha nodded. Now do yours, and find out who the hell this girl really is. I'm fairly certain you'll be in for a surprise. Lord Caroline bowed her head in respect. Remove your mask, my lady, Naruto ordered. Lady Tarina showed discomfort with the order but didn't say anything. Sir Warren and Sir Helman shared estranged looks but went along with it. Dirt was overturned and soon enough Bran and Summer stood at Naruto's right with Ser Delran on his left. Jalabhar arrived, rather intrigued by what was to come. The rest of the Hedge Knights arrived sheathing their swords and strapping their shields to their backs. After an interesting day of spars and fights they were curious to see what this woman looked like. Her brown orbs looked terrified and embarrassed, both of which Naruto had taken note of. He was already starting to piece together who this person was, but he just couldn't put it together. Myra, Bran's voice echoed in surprise. Why are you? How? What? Naruto thought to himself, clearly having lost his voice. Told you you'd be surprised, Sasuke piped. It was indeed Myra. Blank-faced and red-cheeked, her brown eyes shimmered the longer she eyed her companions, and Lord the Hedge Knights were at a loss for words. Jalabhar as well. Ser Delran and Lady Tarina felt their jaws drop. This girl had fed all of them at some point in King's Landing or during their visits to the Red Keep. Lady Tarina narrowed her eyes at the girl hand, instinctually reaching for her rack. This girl had so many secrets, and quite frankly the woman wasn't so keen on trusting someone with an unknown past, for as far as any of them knew, Myra was a kitchen wench, one of the most average wenches the Red Keep had to offer. To think she'd be a skilled killer and knife user had them all keeling over, ready to question reality and their own skills. Naruto thought kept staring at her, and it was beginning to unnerve her. Naruto was silent, trying to come to terms with the woman in front of him. Why was she here? How did she get so good? Naruto started backing away from the built group, clearly confused. Myra, or Caroline, or whoever she was, everything that happened between them was a lie and fake. Naruto, wait, don't take another step closer, Bran growled, drawing his blade. The 5 Hedge Knights didn't know what to do, so they decided to join Bran and drew their blades as well, holding Myra back. She gulped, watching everyone she'd befriended turn against her. In a split second she looked around, seeing all the people stare at her. It made her anxious. Suddenly Lady Tarina grabbed her and led her towards the keep. The swords were sheathed behind her, but instead of confinement to her room she found herself in a different type of quarters. It was dirty and smelled atrocious. Gone was her bed and linens, gone was her mirror and window, gone was her door. Everything was replaced with stone walls and bars. I'm sorry, Myra, Naruto said from the darkness that surrounded her. I don't know if I can trust you. Who even are you? I am. This night was far darker than any Naruto had ever witnessed. He could hear the bugs and insects buzzing around him, and that only seemed to solidify his reasoning. Behind him in a wedge formation, Lady Tarina and Bran were crouched with Summer and Sorsha at their sides. They were followed by Ser Delran and Jalabhar in the center of their wedge, forming the strength and weight The Hedge Knights and Myra who'd decided to take up the identity of Caroline the Masked Knife Mistress. It was an awkward 2 weeks to get used to her presence, but over time and on their journey through the Reach she had proven herself. As an invaluable instrument of warfare she had proven herself on the battlefield, and with the 5 skirmishes they've had with Tyrell and Baratheon forces, chaotic and bloody, Myra or Caroline depending whether or not that mask was on would show her worst. Within time she had gained the trust of everyone. After all, if they were going to be a well-oiled machine they were the cogs, and trust was the oil. Onward they rushed through the Reach, forcing at least 2 Reach Lords and 1 Storm Lord to go full retreat. With just a force of 500, Naruto had managed to defeat 2,000 men in skirmishes up and down the Crownland/Reach border. Now they had made their first puncture through their defensive line. Their training was done and their preparations were done. This was going to be their proving grounds. Tumbleton was weak and ill-manned, ready and ripe for the taking. Naruto was sure that he wasn't going to mess this up. Their only advantage was the cover of darkness. Sure, Tumbleton was indeed ill-manned. They still outnumbered Fox Company easily by at least 5 to 1. Naruto wasn't going to get his troops needlessly killed trudging through the wet tall grass. He and his troops were well out of sight of the Tyrell crossbowmen. If his military studies were of any merit, Tyrell crossbowmen were almost as revered as their heavy knights. Naruto was going to bust that myth and shit on Tumbleton's defenses, and once he was done with that he was going to piss on the Lord's head for good measure. Wait, that's not his train of thought. Sorry, Naruto could hear Sasuke bursting with laughter. It was right there. Don't give me that look, you're going to be the death of me. Naruto glared. Not possible, Sasuke retorted with a smug smirk. I'm the one making sure death won't come for you, remember? Naruto sighed and placed his palm against the ornate handle of his trusted bastard sword. Bran and Jalabhar knocked arrows to their bows, going ahead of the wedge-breaking formation. The Baratheon looked to his forces while he and his companions went in. The main bulk of his troops were lying in wait. The plan was to sneak in through their grate and kill the sentries of the portcullis, all the while opening the main gate. Caroline was going to handing the gatehouse while the rest stormed the walls and battlements, all the while doing their best to stay hidden with torches lining every 5 feet. It would be near impossible, but Naruto felt that they could do it. The first 2 arrows were shot from Jalabhar and Bran's bows. The arrows whizzed through the air, catching perfectly against the walls. Bran and Jalabhar flashed a quick hand sign giving the clear. The wedge split immediately and the companions split in all directions. Naruto was followed closely by Sir Warren. As they neared the first arrow stuck in the wall, the prince smirked at his hedge knight friend and jumped, wrapping his hands around the rope tightly secured with the embedded arrow. The prince pulled himself with a steady grace and rested his hands against the stone surface, watching the guards walk about. Tumbleton was a large city, but not on King's Landing standards. There was a guard for about every 10 yards of wall. The prince made an estimate of about 5 guards in each battlement. There were 10 battlements that lined the walls. Oh, Naruto knew that this was going to be one hell of a fight. Without siege equipment, he wasn't going to act like his uncle or grandfather were. Siege equipment and starving out the people was the tactic of choice. No, he was going to use his small fighting force to his advantage. He was going to strain his enemy to breaking point. He wanted to put his enemies on a crusade for his head and weaken them through attrition. Having waited long enough, Naruto gave a quick wave to the hedge knight waiting below, giving the signal for assault. Sir Warren shot around and began waving his hands, armored arms glinting in the very dim light that the moon managed to reveal through the thick cover of clouds. Naruto could distinctly see Caroline pulling herself up the wall almost like a monkey or child. Once she was over the wall, Naruto could hear a small commotion that just so happened to be loud enough to draw the nearby guards. Naruto looked about waiting for the signal. Suddenly Sasuke appeared and nodded his head without words. Shared. Naruto shot over the wall, knife in hand. He crouched, hiding beneath the wall segments protruding. There were about 8 guards along this length of wall that hadn't taken notice of him as of yet. His heart raced to speeds unknown. These men could turn towards his direction any second, and this mission would be over in a heartbeat. Sir Warren arrived, rolling over to Naruto's side as silent as a mouse. It surprised him how agile the hedge knight really was. Even with all of his armor, Sir Warren knew how to get around in silence. Naruto watched the men lining the wall with a glare. Suddenly, almost simultaneously, all 8 men collapsed to the floor, arrows in their chests. Naruto crawled along, noticing him, Jalabhar and Bran with the archers of Fox Company knocking their arrows. The leaves of the bushes and grass began to rustle and shimmer in the illuminating light of the moon above. They were getting into position. That could only mean that Caroline and Lady Tarina had already dispatched the guards of the gatehouse. The Baratheon shot to his feet and rushed along the wall, all the while keeping low so as to not draw attention. He thought he was in the clear, but that dream was quickly shut down. A Tyrell footman rushed at him, sword in hand and shield in the other. Naruto shot to the side and without a thought dug his blade into the man's side, releasing a gut-wrenching squeal. He was within the battlement, and like he thought, there were about 5 guards stationed. A series of sliding blades and clanging swords echoed above and below the two men. Naruto shared a nervous look with Sir Warren before they too drew their blades. He only hoped that the companions were as fast as he'd hoped. The first soldier rushed at Naruto, ready to kill the siege by removing the head of the snake. That wasn't on Naruto's agenda, though. He swung powerfully, clashing with the Tyrell's blade, sending the boy back in the weight of his own attack. Naruto swung down with no remorse, digging the edge of the blade into the boy's bare forehead. The kid didn't even have enough time to register a scream. There was a small shout from below, followed by a terrifying sounding splash. Naruto wrenched his sword from the boy's head and turned to find Sir Warren with hands covered in blood. "Watch out!" Sir Warren reached to his back and pulled free a knife. Naruto ducked, barely dodging the broadsword swinging for his neck. The footman took the knife to the groin, eliciting a scream. The prince could feel his ears ringing, but shot to his feet, pressing his hands on the Tyrell footman's mouth, all the while tearing the knife from his balls. The levy sunk his teeth into Naruto's palm, breaking his footing. The two tumbled down, breaking into a brawl on the wooden floor. The fifth and final levy jumped over Naruto in his duel to face Sir Warren. Overfilled with misplaced confidence, Sir Warren swung for the levy, but the man dodged, clashing his own blade with the hedge knight's. Warren wasn't about to be outdone by some no-named levy of the reach. He shot his knee forward, digging it into the man's rather scrawny-looking chest. The guard was broken, and soon enough the levy's grip on his sword disappeared with his breath. He wasn't anticipating Sir Warren to be so strong. The levy dropped the sword, leaving him open for Sir Warren to do business. The knight rushed forward and wrapped his hands around the levy's face and twisted so fast the man's entire body twisted with his neck. Another series of cracks were heard, indicating another neck was broken. There was a small struggle, and the sound of clanging metal against wood echoed throughout the battlement. Naruto pushed the limp body of the castrated levy from off of his body and shot to his feet, receiving a small cut to his right eyebrow. Naruto was certain he'd be covered in scars by the end of this war. He and Sir Warren cleaned their weapons for a short while before dashing from the battlement, ready to do damage. Naruto could see Lady Tarina and Sir Delran speeding on the far side of the city walls, cutting down Tyrell levies just as fast as the prince could register them. "We have to keep going until we meet them," Sir Warren quickly said through gasps and heavy breaths. Another battlement ahead. Naruto hurled his knife, jabbing it through a steel sallet of a Tyrell sergeant. The man shot back in a rather comical way, blood trailing in his wake. The prince kicked the first levy that came his way, digging his foot into the boy's guts. Before the boy could fall back, Naruto reached forward, grabbing him by his collar. The boy was struggling to not throw up in his face. The prince knew just how to remedy this boy's problem. With a motion quicker than lightning, Naruto drew his sword and sliced into the levy's torso, spilling his guts onto the stone floor of the castle walls. Sword in hand and shield strapped to his other, Naruto could finally get into the fight. He dashed forward, bashing his shield into the face of a recuperating man at arms. Breaking the man's stance, Naruto lunged, digging the blade through his standard Tyrell coat of plates. With a splash to signify his death, Naruto punched the man off of his blade and rushed the remaining defenders with Sir Warren at his side. Little by little they'd managed to slaughter 15 men and clear out 3 battlements. By the time they met up with the others, Naruto wiped the sweat from his brow and cleared the blood and grime from his nose and cheeks. Lady Tarina rested against a pillar overlooking the city. From the south gatehouse, her brown eyes trailed over to see the faint image of Sir Jared and Carline waiting for the signal at the north gatehouse. "Do it." Naruto nodded with excitement. "Give the signal, you're ready." Naruto. Sasuke rested his hand on the Baratheon's shoulder. "I'll be here giving you help when you need it. So far you've done well to handle yourself. Maybe all I needed was a real battle to get my blood running." Any Naruto asked with a smirk. "Maybe." Sasuke trailed off. "Let's get killing." Morning arrived. With morning came many things: sun, life, and the cold breeze of winter that can't be right. It wasn't possible, not this soon. Lord Tywin shot from his bed and watched his encampment. The winds were dropping in temperature. Tywin growled and stared at the lands in front of him. The moist leaves of the forests surrounding his army whisked back and forth, unknowing when to stop. He knew just what this ungodly cold meant. Robb Stark was close. He turned on his heels, calculating his next moves. Robb Stark has evaded him and distracted him countless times in this war. Robb has shown himself to be a gifted commander and fighter, going so far as to show Tywin that he wasn't afraid to make hard decisions when it comes to the lives of his men. Remembering the Whispering Wood, Robb Stark sent 2,000 men to their deaths just to get to his son, Jaime. That not only showed Robb Stark's willingness to win, but the unwavering loyalty that the North gave him. His men worshipped him as if he were a man out of myth. Tywin was seeking to destroy that, but that task was getting harder and harder as the days passed. Robb Stark was tearing apart fortress and outpost after outpost, leaving snow and dead Lannister men in his wake. Robb was constantly on the move, never staying in one place for too long. How his men weren't suffering from attrition and exhaustion, Lord Tywin couldn't discern, but every army has a weakness. Every leader has a weakness, while some are too proud to admit. Everyone does. Lord Tywin turned back to his table and glared at the disturbing placement of the Starks' forces. Their numbers were near equal to his own. He took a deep breath as he began to take into account the Lords of the Vale that had joined the fight on Robb Stark's side. The king in the north was gaining territory and allies faster than the royal army can muster a sizable force. For a counter-attack, Tywin had to hand it to his rather incompetent grandson Joffrey. That idea for a royal army was executed quickly, and within 6 months everything had fallen into place for not only their rise but their downfall. The Vale saw this, and with their misplaced hatred on his house, they rose up to fight for independence. The horror of having a kingdom as large as the North assimilating the Riverlands and the Vale. Tywin couldn't fathom the power vacuum that would ensue if they do win their freedom. Not only that, but what's to stop the Dornish from declaring their independence as well? No one has ever conquered Dorne since Daeron. Tywin rubbed his temples, feeling a headache beginning to build. This war was going to be his last, he just knew it. But if there was one thing he felt he needed, it was a warm hearth to be around, for the winds were growing colder. Lord Tywin, I bring horrible news. A scout suddenly came, escorted by knights sworn to House Lannister. Speak, Tywin said with a deep, terrifying tone. Robb Stark is on his way here as we speak.